We are back. It's
Hey, hey,
Actually
hey.
Podcast in the house. Hope everybody is doing well out there. It's beautiful out today. So we're just getting booted up here. Bear with us for just a couple minutes. That's interesting. Okay, I can dig it.
All right, we'll take it.
I'm happy with that.
Wow.
So say hi, guys. I can actually see your comments on screen now, so you're welcome to pop
Oh,
in and drop some questions or some facts or some knowledge you got. You can lambast us for being fools and mark ass busters if you want. You can do whatever you
Mark
want.
ass busters, man. That's a word. That's a term I haven't heard in a
That's a
long
callback.
time.
If anybody's ever seen Don't Be a Menace to South
South Central
Central
while
while
drinking
drinking your
your
juice
juice
in the
in the
hood.
hood. Yeah.
That's a classic, man.
Uh,
Wayne's Bros.
I remember that scene where they're in the back of that like U-Haul truck partying, and they got that one girl there. It's like, come on, baby, just take a drink. And she's like, nah, I get a little crazy when I drink, and then she drinks, and then she does the whole head spinning around and puking all over the place thing, like
was like
the Exorcist.
extra.
And she's like, I told you I got a little crazy when I drank, and it's
She
just
did
it was the most stupid thing ever. But at that
everything.
period of time, that kind of comedy was king.
Oh yeah, man. I
Just
love old
stupid.
spoofs, man. Hot Shots was
Oh
great.
man.
All the Naked Gun movies and all those. It's all so good. So yeah, looks like we are good to go here. Welcome one, welcome all. Thank you so much for tuning in.
I could be mistaken, but it also
Meaning Making 101 now continues.
looks like the video quality is a little bit better too coming through this new system.
Oh hey, I think it might be lossless here on StreamYard. This is the conclusion of John Vervaeke's Awakening from the Meaning Crisis lecture series that we have been covering for the past year plus. And, even doing it every week that we could, we still couldn't get the series done in 1 year. It's that long, and it's something else. I can feel a difference between when we started and where we are now. Just in the way that I look at the world, it's definitely been enriched. The whole idea is to help cultivate wisdom as an answer, a solution to the meaning crisis that our species now finds itself in this time of breakdown and increasing division and growing distrust and prevailing systems of authority that we used to perhaps hold more dear or more in concert together. And we are having to recapitulate our understanding of the sacred, of what it means to be a free and responsible human being. And so it's a wild time for civilization. And if we're going to make it through this bottleneck, I do believe that we need quite a bit more wisdom in ourselves and in the wider world. And what better place to start but right here within each one of our own selves. So, we can, I believe, change this world from the inside out.
And a definition of one of the many definitions that you can use for wisdom is the safeguarding of oneself against bullshit.
Amen to that,
You
right?
know, which I found it. Going through this, it's handy. What we've learned is handy because as you see the propaganda coming from all sides, and then just the what would you call it, the misinterpreting of things, or interpreting through the tint of whatever bias glasses you currently are wearing at the time. How to step aside from that and look at it again.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, how do you even catch the fact that we have these frames, these lenses that we see through, all these layerings of conditioning and perceptions that we have taken on that are there in front of what we could call like our primary awareness. So there's just the very fact that we are aware beings present in this moment, taking in all of the sensory data. And then there's this frame of conditioning from this experience in my childhood. Here's this frame of conditioning as I've grown older, developed certain beliefs and ideas, and they're constantly upgraded frames. And we get very attached to our frames. We begin to think that, in fact, we are our frames, and that's the ego problem. Is we all have egos, we all have personalities, personages, cast images that we speak and act through. But when we become misidentified with the cast image, thinking that's what we are, we can get offended when people insult or judge your cast image. But ultimately, I'm not my image. I have a personality. But who is the one that has the personality is the great mystery, is the great question. What is this mystery of consciousness, of self-reflective awareness that we all have? how did that come about? We still haven't answered. It's one of the great problems of science. We still haven't figured it out. This series goes very deep into exploring that, through psychology, and the science of, neurology, neuroscience, and philosophy, and all the different ways that we have studied consciousness. It all comes together here in this series, and Vervaeke, I think, has done a tremendous job of really helping us see behind that programming, that conditioning, and that those great gifts that also are double-edged swords, like our capacity for relevance realization, which can also make us prone to self-deception. The very machinery that makes us adaptable can indeed also cause us to quite effectively bullshit ourselves. And of course, we are all prone to the deception of mass media marketing and psychological manipulation techniques being employed by governments and industries around the world. And we have to get wise to all of that so that we can continue to make those wise decisions for the future. So yeah, anyways, that's a whole lot of saying that this has been an awesome series. And you got any thoughts on reflections on this past 50 that we've been through here?
It's been a lot.
It's been a lot.
I have taken more notes than my entire 12 years of my primary education, or whatever, primary and secondary, or whatever you want to call it, No.
What was one of the greatest insights you feel like you picked up from the series? Just last episode, self 1 and self 2 idea of that idea that we can grow through.
I would have to say how, what would the word be? Let me think.
Words.
Yeah,
verbs,
words, and
adjectives.
it's right on the tip. Well, okay. How everywhere everywhere you see different types of opponent processes. Things come in threes, but also things come in pairs that are mutually reinforcing and moderating as well. And that's, within the thinking self, within the physical self, but then also within, societal, I don't want to say behaviors, but interactions within society as a whole, but also, my own personal interactions within society. I'm still angry as ever, but I'm getting a little bit more accurate at what I'm angry at. I'm just naturally, like, my default state is the slow burn of anger. That's just how it is. It's always been that way since I was a kid. But
Hey, at least you're honest with it then.
a lot
he really actually is a nice guy. He just likes
yeah,
to
no,
say that.
I'm nice. I just, it's like, it's just, like some people are naturally more like Eeyore type people, and it's kind of sad. They're still nice and they still have a good time, but they still run a little sad. Some people run happy. Some people run manic. I run grumpy. Like Grumpy Cat was my spirit animal there for a little bit. But it's also, ever since I was a little kid, there's this feeling that something is wrong with the world.
Feel that.
And nothing's more infuriating than not being able to put your finger on or even close to what is wrong. And that leads to, self-deceptive practices of getting emotional over things, or too emotional over things, and responding to the emotions before realizing what it is that is actually triggering those emotions within you. Yeah, and actually a practice that I've been doing for a long time in my adult life is I don't let myself get too happy or any of the emotions, really, because the come downs are not good. But now I have a language to talk about it, like an opponent process and what that is and the ideas behind that and what's going on. Swing too far one way, it has to swing back the other way so far. And it's just little things in these series of episodes that just pop up randomly in your day-to-days. Another benefit is realizing that, we could talk about different, thinkers and scholars and have quite a bit of disdain for what they've done or what's been done in their name, but still be able to gather the small scraps of what they were trying to get at that is still trying to find truth. As misguided or egotistical or just, downright horrific, it could have, it's ended up, like Marx didn't just come up with his ideas on his own. He was very much inspired by Hegel. And what Hegel was trying to do was trying to create a system that would just naturally grow itself and make an enlightened human race. He had a philosophy, and then he sat down next to it and expected it to do its thing. And he wasn't right in, I would say, most of his assumptions that led to his beliefs and proclamations, but there are grains in there that are still being dealt with now. And he was part of the conversation, even though I don't really have too much terrible respect for, a lot of what he was getting at in that conversation. It was still part of this ongoing, long, humanity's old conversation. And being able to look at, scholars and thinkers and writers and speakers and all that in that kind of way allows me to get more out of it than I would if it was just, either confirmation bias watching or kill the messenger kind of stuff. You don't like the person who's saying it, so I'm not going to look at anything they have to say. Not a big fan of Freud, but he was right about some things, terribly wrong about other things, but still.
The willingness to entertain or try and understand an idea without having to adopt it is something that seems very important in the cultivation of our wisdom, our capacity to understand things and their potential repercussions deeply. Vervaeke's, the way he spoke on virtue really moved me, and how we can't be rational without a process of aspiration within ourselves. That really struck me as well. That aspiration is so key to our human development. And you can aspire towards a higher expression of yourself, you could say, from the being mode. And this is the growth mode. But we're always trying to approach things from the having mode, so we're trying to accumulate traits and things like
titles, and I have read so many of this, I have this,
right.
I have this,
But
I have
buying
this.
a car or buying a house doesn't make you mature. Necessarily, that kind of
right.
stuff. So acquiring things from the having mode is not necessarily
just because you have PhD at the end of your name doesn't mean the utterances that come out of your mouth are worth the air that you're breathing out. I hate to be that way, but that's the appeal to authority issue that we have, where it's just like, well, these are the experts. It's like, well, yeah, but as we've learned through this 50-part series, an expertise in one thing can very much hinder the understanding of a lot of other things.
Yeah. Well, and of course, our certainty.
Yeah.
Our certainty can be so dangerous, and especially when someone has a decent intellect, they can think of themselves as smart enough to see around things and not even look into something. They automatically assume they already know what's correct on it. So oftentimes we pick this up from our tribe too, or from our group, or from the common people, so to speak. Like whatever seems to be the most commonly held opinion, people will often just automatically adopt, especially if it seems logical on the outside on first impression.
Yeah, what is that fallacy called? It's like appeal to the masses or appeal to it's basically it's known appeal. It's like, it was known the earth was flat.
Right.
So much for that, right?
Yeah.
But they may have been wrong about being flat, but the way they used measurements for, guiding themselves around the supposedly flat world worked out well enough at that point in time, right? That's the other thing too, is, the safeguarding against the fallacy of finding one thing wrong with an argument and then saying all of it's false because of the one thing wrong. Just like, listening to people you may not agree with, or even their point or anything. It's still that kind of function. It's like, just because, the ancient natural philosopher, I forget the name, but basically it's like, his core principle is like, everything at its core is the moist, is the wetness, and he was wrong, but what he was trying to get at was going along the path of, I don't want to say right, but knowing more, questioning, and questioning.
They were trying to intuit into what is the underlying substrate of life, of matter itself, and they thought it was maybe some kind of fluid or flux
Yeah.
or something like
Yeah.
that, or like, well, there's water underneath the ground, and water in the ocean, water all around us, everywhere we look, and you squeeze a fruit, water comes out, kind of thing. So they thought maybe ultimately it's all like
Yeah.
some kind of fluid,
Well, kind of like what we do
all is
with,
the wet.
we thought at this, the smallest thing was the atom, and then,
Hmm.
and this is way before our modern science too.
Yeah,
The idea that there's something at the center that creates these things. I forget what the original word for
yeah,
it was, but now we're like, oh well, there's electrons and protons and neutrons, but then when you get into them, oh, there's different types of quarks, and then well, if you want to look at everything, it's just, you know, are there many electrons or just many potential spots at different,
hmm,
different areas? So we keep advancing our understanding, even though we ultimately are incorrect,
right,
like in its totality.
hmm,
I'm fairly certain that no science, no philosophy or anything can get to that. Yes, it is correct.
hmm,
It's just how well is it questing
yeah,
down the
yeah.
line of questions
And
and
if we're not so attached to our ideas, we're willing to challenge our own conceptions, then we're okay if there's something a little bit off in our current perception of something once we come across new information. In fact, we even look for that information.
and,
We're okay with
and
challenging our own
it should be exciting.
conceptions
It's
and
like, oh
beliefs.
good,
Yes.
nothing's more terrified in my mind than getting to the end.
Yeah.
That
Well, if you switch your orientation from wanting to be right and seem right to other people to wanting to follow what is most right, true, and good for one and all, then you are willing to find out that you were wrong multiple
Mhm.
times over and keep on willing to be wrong and be happy with it, be fine with it, laugh at it. Oh, I used to think that. And we do this as we grow. You look at yourself when you're 23 looking back at 18, and then when you're 30 looking back at 20 some odd, and then, so on and so forth. As we go older, we can see how much we've grown and how we've changed our ideas of things, and we've grown a little bit more mature, a little bit wiser about certain aspects of life.
Hopefully we do mature and get a little bit wiser, and we don't just get
We all do to
calcified
some
down
degree,
into.
but sometimes it is very clamped down, I guess you
Yeah,
could
well,
say.
you can grow into that clamping down too. Do you grow up and out, or do you create a
Grow more
shell?
clamped and more
Y- You
shelled
know,
over. Yeah, for
um,
sure. For sure.
and that's up to the free choice of the individual, really, because you can't force people to be open and and I don't want to say like open like in the sense of like interactions with people open. I mean like opening into understanding, into
Mhm.
questioning, and you can't force people into that. You can't guilt them into that,
Right. Yeah.
but you can force people to close down, which
Hmm.
is through
Oh, yeah. Social pressure
social
and scare
pressures,
tactics
different
and
types of
manipulation.
you
And,
know
yeah.
stuff like that. So it's how do we assist in the affordance of opening and
Mm.
further understanding, and that's a hard question. It's like John Vervaeke's doing what he's doing, and he's affording in that way, and he's had to think for a very long time, gather his thoughts together, put it together, create a method,
Hmm. Stand on the shoulders
enact
of
it.
many giants to pull it
Yeah,
all together.
so
Yeah.
from my end, like I happen to be a musician, so there is that end, but I'm not like a poet or a lyricist, so I can't put any of these thoughts into that. It's more of like when I interact with people at shows or at I don't know, or other people, like get the chance to talk to them, and you don't preach this stuff at them because they're just gonna be like, ooh
No.
woo face,
Yeah. Yeah. Try
but
and live it. You know.
if you can speak.
You can embody it over time.
Yeah, you can speak and act in a way that is in.
Concert with that. Yeah.
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 So this has helped with that quite a bit. Also with like my organizing of ideas, I've had to become a little neater in my brain of how I store the information and
Mm.
where I put
Just
it.
to
And
understand how our brains work, how our
yeah,
thinking processes work, how we realize relevance, what's happening in the human brain and body when we have religious experiences. All of that has been really, really intriguing and also helpful, um, because then he further relates how the very gifts of our consciousness also have double-edged sword effects to them, and we see how we've become so deceived in our culture as well. So mapping out how our culture got into this mess has been really intriguing and very helpful. And then, of course, the encouragement to embody this way of being that Buddha, that Jesus, that Socrates exemplified for us has been a really helpful encouragement. So here we are, man.
Yeah.
It is the age of the cultivation of wisdom, time upon this planet. If there ever was one, this is the time where we get to turn it up, ratchet up the
Well,
wisdom game more than ever.
now is crazy and traumatic and weird and gaslighting and all that stuff, but I wouldn't trade being alive now for any other point in time
either, man.
in the
Yeah.
future or the past, because
Feel that.
I don't know the future. And well, the fact that I probably won't die from a stub toe is kind of nice.
Yeah, right.
You know what I mean? Or won't be,
Yeah, just
cast
some
upon the
minor
bonfire because one of my neighbors was tripping on some ergot, not realizing it, and thought I was doing some witchcraft.
Yeah,
you know?
right.
Yeah, that's it's good. It's good to be alive now. We should really attempt to make things better and always better,
Yeah, everything smells better than I'm sure it used to.
and not
And we smell better than
and not making things great again, but instead of making things this idea of looking back and trying to revert. It's the rescuing the baby from the bathwater. We're not looking back, but we're gleaning the core seeds that are useful and are promising to create nutritious fruit of thought and community. We can look back and see what worked and what didn't, instead of saying, "Oh, well, back then at that period of time, it was just this people and this people oppressing this people and all that stuff." It's like, well, yeah, maybe to certain amounts and varying depending on where you are and what period of time, but what's the other stuff in there? Because it couldn't have all been bad in oppression, or else we wouldn't exist. I think the human species has a much stronger history of cooperation than it does of trying to oppress and kill each other. Even though
we
our
wouldn't be here
history is
anymore.
marked by wars, but still, we don't write about the times in between. Like
Right.
we may mark history through the traumatic points, but there's so much more history that's just everyday mundane cooperation. That's like what we were talking about when we were on the road the other day. Like, yeah, you may have asshole drivers that cut people off or are pushy and this, that, or the other, but for the most part, everybody gets down the road just fine.
Yep. 99% of everybody is all making sure they stay in their lane. They don't hit the car that's beside them while they're going 70 miles an hour down the highway in their 2-ton block of metal. Yeah, it's pretty impressive how we all work together and can flow together on that level, even when we're complete strangers.
Yeah.
Yeah, the human being is a remarkable creature. We're quite docile compared to our primate cousins and many other animals. And we're such a rare animal that will, and no other mammal does this, where it will just go and hang out with large groups of other strangers in a restaurant, at a club, on a bus, packed into an airplane with everything sealed off, and we get along just fine.
Yeah.
We have little tiffs here and there, but they're not that common. And most of the time when they happen, immediately 3, 4, 5 people stand up and try and break up the fight.
Well, it's getting less common nowadays, I will say. But
It's a different time right now.
I think that would be under the learned helplessness.
It feels
but on
like
a
we're all
massive
being
scale.
egged on to want to fight one another. The learned helplessness is a
want
big
to
part
fight
of it
one
too.
another, but then when we see something wrong, well, I can't do anything
can't do
about it
anything
because
about it.
maybe I'll get arrested,
And it's
or
hopeless
it's not my
also, yeah.
responsibility. And then there's another thing that humans do. It's something like group deference. Is like the bigger the group that you're in, the more people will look aside from a problem because there's always somebody else that could do something about it. I can't do nothing about it, right?
Yeah.
That kind of thing. Which it's not, oh, well, you should do something about it, or you shouldn't do something about it. It's at any point in time is going to be different, and you have to be able to have the wisdom to judge what's the right thing to do.
True. Yeah.
Optimize. So yeah, if you're a little frail person and two big old, mammoths of men are trying to brawl it out, it's probably not best for you to get between them, but
Unless you're also big and brawny enough to be able to break up
Or
the
you're
fight, or one of them really well.
yeah,
and you
but
can
that's
actually
where
pull
it's
that
like,
off.
the situation changes because you also might be big and brawly too, and they don't like that, and then they just beat the crap out of you.
Yeah, then
So,
they team up on you.
Yeah. Because maybe they're actually friends and this is what they do regularly. They just fight each other in public because they, I've known people like that.
They could be
They're good
Irish.
friends. Yeah. Irish, Italian, insert any European country at one point in time,
Right.
Yeah. Could be Russians. Hey, I love you. Smack. Imagine like, the big super burly, no neck guys.
Sargoff.
Yeah, right.
All right, fam. Well, I think it's about that time. We're going to jump on in to episode 50 of John Vervaeke's Awakening from the Meaning Crisis.
Welcome back to Awakening from the Meaning Crisis. So last time we looked in depth at Corbin and Jung and tried to draw out very deeply the notion of the relationship to the sacred second self. I launched into sort of a critical, sort of mutual criticism between Corbin and Jung and brought in some Buber along the way. And then I pointed to somebody whose work, also deriving from Heidegger, integrates aspects of all of these together in kind of a profound way. Tillich is deeply influenced and aware of what he calls depth psychology, the kind of psychology in Jung. He, of course, is deeply aware of Heidegger. I don't think that Tillich was aware of Corbin, but he is deeply aware of the symbol in an imaginal rather than in a merely imaginary way. Tillich takes the meaning crisis seriously. He writes perhaps his most well-known, and I think it's a masterpiece book, The Courage to Be, as a response to the meaning crisis. Like Jung and Corbin, and for very related reasons, he's deeply critical of literalism and fundamentalism throughout. But he takes it deeper, as I mentioned. He really deepens it in terms of Heidegger's critique of ontotheology, and he becomes critical of literalism and fundamentalism as forms of idolatry in which we are attempting to have, right, rather than become. So there's some excellent books on the relationship between Jung and Tillich. This is a series of ongoing work by John Doorley. I recommend two books to you. The Psyche as Sacrament, which I've tweeted about in my book recommendations. I would also represent his later book, Paul Tillich, Carl Jung, and the Recovery of Religion. But make no mistake, Doorley is not talking about a recovery in a nostalgic sense. He writes another book called Strategy for a Loss of Faith, where he is trying to get beyond classical theism. And so I recommend Doorley's work as a comprehensive way of bringing about a deep dialogue and a kind of integration between Jung and Tillich. Okay, so Tillich sees the main response to the meaning crisis, and here's how Tillich is not just theorizing. He is trying to give us guidance on how to live. And let's remember that this is really matters because of the way Tillich resisted the Nazis. Because what Tillich talks about in The Courage to Be is courage. Now, he's careful to note that this is a kind of existential courage that ultimately allows us to confront and overcome meaninglessness in its depth, but also, of course, to more practically respond to, perverted responses to the meaning crisis itself, like Nazism and its Gnostic nightmare. This process of encouragement. Now, he is like Aristotle. He's not talking about something as simple as just bravery, facing danger, or fortitude, the ability to endure. No. For Tillich, courage is a virtue. There's something of wisdom in courage. Courage involves within it that central feature of wisdom, which is seeing through illusion into reality. The brave person faces danger, but that's all we can say about them. The person with fortitude endures difficulty, but that's all we can say of them. The courageous person sees through the illusion and the distortion of fear or distress to what is truly good and acts accordingly. So, what is this seeing through? And how does it help us confront the meaning crisis? So this notion of seeing through, seeing to the depths, as Tillich often says, right, is related to Tillich's notion of faith. And here, notice how we're circling back around. And this is really a circle, because Tillich's notion of faith is not the assertion of propositions to be believed. He is circling back, right, to the ancient Israelite Hebrew notion of da'ath. And now we can add that participatory knowing in a course of being is an aspirational process. Tillich understands faith as ultimate concern, that which concerns us ultimately. His notion of idolatry is to treat something that could be a symbolic icon through which you articulate and develop your ultimate concern. You transform that into an idol, an object to have and possess, to control and manipulate. And you thereby are using the machinery that is appropriate for ultimate concern for something that it is not ultimate. What is ultimate concern? What is concern? Well, when you're concerned about something, you care about it, but you're also coping with it. You're committed to it. You're involved in it. It encompasses you even though you are being involved in and through it. It is deeply perspectival and participatory. That's what he's trying to get at. And it is aspirational, and it is open-ended. It points towards the inexhaustibleness of the ground of being. So, of course, this Tillich's notion is directed at Heidegger's notion of Dasein. Right? This concern, the Dasein is the being whose being is in question, and therefore, right, by our perspectival participatory knowing of our being, we come into deeper contact. But remember, for Heidegger, that requires a deep remembering, an overcoming of our forgetfulness, an aletheia. We have to have the ontological wonder towards the ground of meaning, the ground of being. This leads right into Tillich's notion of God, which, right, I'm going to try and propose to you is transgressive of classical theism in important ways, without it being identifiable with atheism in important ways. So Tillich understands God as an icon, as opposed to an idol, as an imaginal symbol for the ground of being. God symbolizes the ground of being, and therefore God is no kind of being. There is a no thingness to God. God is no kind of thing. And any attempt to reify, to think of God as a thing, is for Tillich a form of idolatry. So here's what I'm trying to get you to see, what Tillich means. Here's meaning, right? And here's reality, and here's the relationship between them. God is the simultaneous grounding of all of these. You can see the influence of Heidegger here, right? God is the ground of the meaning-making, of reality, and of the relationship between them. And any attempt to limit God to any one of these three components, just to the meaning, just to the reality, just to the relationship between them, is for Tillich a profound kind of idolatry. This is why literalism and fundamentalism are so pernicious to him. So, ultimate concern, if we allow ourselves to truly come into question and quest in a wondering way, if we participate in, right, an aspirational trajectory motivated by ultimate concern, this puts us into a resonant relationship. This gets to what is known as Tillich's method of correlation. This is how he saw himself doing theology. I know it's kind of odd for, right, a naturalistic cognitive scientist to be talking about theology again, but I think we've gotten to a place where that seems to you as a viable and valuable thing to do. What's the method of correlation? That there is always this ongoing tonos, this polar tension, which we talked about earlier, between existential questioning, understood as existential questing, and what Tillich calls revelation, the way the depths of reality reveal themselves. So these are always resonating with each other. The revelation, right, has to fit the existential questioning, but the existential questioning has to fit itself. So there's a mutual dynamic fittedness going on. No, I want to get a verbal rather than an adjectival. Yeah, there is an ongoing resonant fitting, right? Mutual fitting togetherness of the existential questioning and the revelation. You can see how this is very similar to anagoge. I think one of the problems that I see in a lot of interpreters of Tillich, and I've read quite a few, is that this correlational method has been misunderstood as just propositional theology. That this is all about, propositional proposals. Listen to the word proposition. Propositional proposals, and then what we get other propositions from the sacred text, the Bible, and what we're doing is we're putting, right, the propositions of theology into concordance with the propositions of the Bible. And I think that's to fundamentally trivialize Tillich, to not get at the depths, the existential depths of the method of correlation. I want to propose a different way of understanding that picks up on the tonos and takes us towards God as the ground of being, as I've represented it to you. And this is the language Tillich used. Tillich talks about the depths of reason. Right. This is a Platonic notion. That which makes reasoning possible. It's all the relevance realization machinery, I would argue. The recursive machinery of rationality, the aspirational rationality that Keller talks about. All those things, the depths of reason. And Tillich talks about that, right? We have an ecstatic relationship, ecstasy. When the depths of our reason, we're standing beyond ourselves. It's the depths of the psyche, but not just in the psychological way that Jung means, but also the depths of the grounding depths of our rationality. And then what stands between is a symbol in Corbin's imaginal sense, and Tillich is so clear about that, right? The symbol to the depths of reality. So in the psyche, the depths, right, of reason are experienced as ecstasis, self-transcendence, moving beyond myself, right? So crucial, right, to aspiration, genuine transcendence in genuine self-transcendence. The depths of reality, Tillich talks about, he uses two words here. Sometimes he uses the word miracle, and this is probably like, I know for me, that's like, oh no, right? And that's like angel because it looks like magic in the pejorative sense of the word. He also talks about it as mystery. I think there's two ways using some Heidegger, which is fair because of the Heideggerian influence on Tillich. Right? We can think of miracle as that aspect of being that we've talked about as the shining. And we can talk about the mystery as that aspect we've talked about as, right, the withdrawal into the moreness, the combinatorial explosive depths of reality. And of course, I've tried to argue through Heidegger and through Corbin, but especially through Heidegger, how these two are inter-affording, in our sense of realness. And then the idea, the method of correlation is basically, as I suggested to you, the anagoge between the ecstasis as we resonate with the depths, the grounding and formative depths of reason are resonating with the grounding and formative depths of realness, and they are anagogically cycling together. So, you've heard all of this before, but let's quickly repeat it. For Tillich, the symbol is much more than a sign. Chris Mastropietro, in his first discussion with me, brought this out excellently, and that is clearly the case in Tillich. The symbols are participatory. The symbol opens up levels of reality otherwise closed to us. The symbol opens up levels of ourselves otherwise closed to us, and it does this in a mutually affording, resonant fashion. Symbols are not made by us. And this, of course, something we've talked about before, and we'll see it come out when we get to Barfield. They are self-organizing, and they grow out of the unconscious within us and the unconscious without us. Symbols have a life. They can die. They can be born, they can live, they can die. Tillich worries that many of the symbols in Christianity are dying, and that fundamentalism and literalism are an inappropriate way of trying to hold on to them and keep them alive, rather than affording the rebirth, that's the wrong word, affording the new birth of a new symbol that brings back the relationship, the resonant relationship that the old symbol possessed. Perhaps this is what Jonathan Pajot means when he feels that Christianity in the meaning crisis is going through a profound death and rebirth of its symbolic structure. For Tillich, symbols have a surplus of meaning. There is a moreness to them. If they're not resonating with moreness, they're not symbols. They have a numinous character grounded in the resonant depth of mind and reality. And therefore, symbols are deeply transformative, they're deeply transjective, they're deeply translucent, etc., etc. So, this is why correlation is not just propositional theology. If you're not undergoing a profound transformation, you're not doing Tillich's correlational method. So, how is this transformation, how is it realized symbolically? It's realized symbolically, and you're going to see, okay, how is all of this? How is it realized by you? Both senses of the word realized. Taken into your frame, but also actualized in reality. How is this transformative power of the symbol realized? It's realized in the relationship between the existential self and the essential self. And do you see what's coming here? This is the relationship of the current self, the self in existence, to the sacred second self. The essential self is the self in the fullness of being. Remember Plato's anagoge, the self in its fullness of being that is capable of recognizing through conformity the fullness of being in the world. This relationship that Tillich is pointing to use, we can use language we've carefully worked out together. This relationship between the existential self and the essential self is aspirational. Tillich he repeatedly talks about how the essential self is ahead. Of course, not causally ahead, normatively ahead. The essential self is ahead, not causally, but normatively. It's ahead of the existential self. The essential self beckons the existential self towards fulfillment. It's constantly tempting, if you'll allow me this language, the existential self to a better way of being. It's trying to tempt it out of the world in which it might be existentially trapped. This is the gnosis within Tillich. So
So we take break time. All right,
Use
let's
to break down.
look back on what we just
Courage
covered.
the courage to confront meaninglessness, encouragement,
Yes, I love
courage
that.
as a virtue,
To
and
instill courage, encouragement, to instill courage in the mind of another.
so and then turning it into a virtue, which the virtue to be is the virtue that allows us to see through illusion into reality, particularly with things that are scary and stressful and bring up
Yes.
anxiety within us.
Yes, and seeing through illusion into what is truly good
Yeah.
and to act accordingly
Yeah,
with that.
yeah, seeing through the illusion of fear, not disregarding it, but seeing through it, much like a lens, seeing through the fear.
And seeing past it, and clearing the lens.
Yeah,
So seeing to the depths, Tillich's notion of faith. Faith is not something simply of proclaiming, making propositions that are to believed. It is that deep inner knowing and an orientation to life that reflects that deep inner knowing.
yeah, aspirational opposed to assertion.
Yes, faith as an ultimate concern. So, like committedness. So, this is going back to the ancient Hebrew. When we read faith in the Bible, for instance, we in modern times have been taking it to mean a belief, something you believe,
Or closer to like hope, except
something like a cross between belief and hope, right? But it actually, the connotation of the word in ancient Hebrew, when we more closely translate it, actually means it's connoting commitment. So as such, as you would to a spouse in a relationship or to a project or a team, it's faithfulness to the cause. So that's what faithfulness and to have faith actually means. And we've been getting that one wrong for centuries now.
yeah,
And that's been part of the reason that we've gotten off track. And then idolatry he gets
and
into.
faith in the ultimate concern.
So idolatry is to treat an icon as an idol. So icons, symbols that we're supposed to see through to be able to comprehend and relate with something deeper. We can oftentimes turn into idols, fixed ideas, and then we get into the mess of my God is the right one. No, my God is the right one. Okay, now we're gonna fight over it. We're gonna war over it.
Yeah, my God can
And that
beat up
certainty.
your God.
Yeah. So faith, it needs to be open ended.
Yeah, and you can see it like this. It's like, say, like in worshiping, you could worship the cross or worship at the cross, and at the cross is using the cross as a tool, if you will, because it is a symbol, which is an analogy for
worship.
something that's much greater
To
than
aim your
what you
worship
can
at,
say.
at what the cross symbolizes.
Yeah, so creating like say a center point of an idea to put your concern into.
Yeah. So it seems like it'd be much more important.
Opposed to like this cross here, there's this sacred thing that I parade around because the wood's super special because some I don't know forefather died underneath of it or
Right.
yada,
Or
yada,
this
yada.
represents my belief that Jesus was the one and only Son of God, and that's what makes me a Christian. I think that it's more about acting as Jesus expressed, as he embodied, following that way of being that gets us closer.
Well,
And that's true faith.
and part of that symbol is the crossroads between suffering and understanding,
Right.
as well. And there you are. And not suffering in the sense of pain suffering, but always that threat of shaking yourself apart, the unbalanced wheel, the dukkha, and then the understanding. So then what we're seeing here now is we're seeing two axes of understanding. So this is why we use symbols, is because we can put a lot of information in it. And you don't worship the ampersand. You just use it, and it stands in place for something that, well, in this case, that we didn't want to print out 3 letters, so we just made one. But expand that up and outward. You don't, like you think the Masons don't worship that symbol that they have. The symbol that they have represents certain ideas that are core to their belief systems and what they think makes up their I don't want to call it an organ. It's an organization.
Oh, it's
but
like what
they're whatever.
our flag points to: liberty and justice for all, freedom, the value of freedom, and all of that. So all symbols are meant as like icon on a
Yeah.
computer screen. It points you towards something that is a fount of information, and it's a very simplified, contextualized, symbol for an icon that you can click on and then go deeper into. So, faith, commitment, being deeply involved, open-ended,
Concern.
open-ended concern. And
Yeah. So that
that
the
points
word.
towards the inexhaustibleness of the ground of being.
Yeah. So what is that concern?
So not giving God limits.
Yeah.
Not trying to box God in,
Yeah.
so that we can be in participatory relationship with that ground of being and come to grow through that relationship. So Tillich's notion of God, it's not atheistic. It's God as an icon, a symbol for something that is unspeakable for us.
Yeah.
We cannot try and over-define God. It's dangerous and messy every time we do this.
God is meaning, God is reality, God is also the relationship of it all at once. Meaning by itself is not God, reality is not God, and the relationship between meaning and reality is not God, but all three of it together is God. That symbol, God, is what's for.
It's constantly generative. It's omnipresent, always has been, always will be. It's infinite, so we can never fully grasp it.
Well, interestingly enough, the Trinity and what is it? Transubstantiation, the idea, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, is structured this way. So,
We see this in
so
other.
God is the Father, God is the Son, God is the Holy Spirit, but the Father is not God, the Son is not God, the Holy Spirit is not God in themselves. It's
all of it at once.
Yeah, so God is all of it.
Yeah.
It's like, my toe is human, my finger is human. How they work together is human, but like
You can't talk about them separately.
My toe is, my toe is not a full human.
Yeah.
This is not a full human. All of this together is human. What is it? The Hindu saying, we are something like the lotus petal toes on the feet of God,
Right.
Kind of thing. Yes, we are God. The entirety of us is God. The symbol of
Everything
meaning
is.
and reality is God, but we're not the totality of God, right?
Certainly not. No.
It's all the pieces, and
We're connected too, intrinsically interconnected with that infinite source, but we ourselves, of course, are not able to see everything at once.
well, is
a
a grain of sand a beach?
Right. That's right.
Is a pile of sand a beach?
Yeah. So we do have these individualized perspectives that we see through, but there's also infinite room for us to grow towards and improve towards.
Yeah.
So we have these symbols to relate with and grow towards.
Whether you believe in, God, like pointy finger guy in the sky, or some everything, or the ultimate consciousness, if you want to go that route, or the perfect example, whether you believe or any of that or not, you can still use, at least when understanding Tillich and getting what he was getting at, you can use God as the symbol. And I would say capital G-O-D, God, not necessarily God, small thing, because that's a stand-in for deity.
Yeah, because God comes before all things.
Yeah.
God is beyond thingness.
Yeah.
He's before. He's the ground, the fount of it all. And so it's really dangerous when we start to try and compartmentalize God into specific boxes that limit our capacity to relate with it.
So
if we participate in a way that's motivated by that ultimate concern, that faithfulness, we are cultivating a relationship with that ground of being.
So there's Tillich's method of correlation, which is, so you have on one side this existential questing, and then revelation, and then there's this tension between the two, and this resonating between the two. So this mutual dynamic fitting togetherness of the two.
Yes, this resonating with each other that they're doing. So the existential questing has to fit itself with the revelatory way that things reveal themselves, revelation, revealing. So, and they both got to constantly be refitting with each other.
Yeah, and not a proclamation revealing revelation, but an actual
experiential
in action. physicality and spirituality revelation. Not, this is what it said in this book. You see, oh, you have this question, you're questioning along this path. Well, here's this book that says this thing. It's like, well, the book is yet again another tool, another icon that you can use, but it happens to be filled with a lot of sub icons that are hyperlinked together in order to get at a grander point that's even harder to talk about with words.
Right. It's something that you have to basically learn to practice within yourself and realize and transform and practice with in order to realize.
So there's depths of reason, so which would be all the machinery of relevance realization, everything we've been talking about, all the psychotechnologies that lead us up to it, all the quirks within our subconscious and subconscious minds, all of that.
Everything that makes reason possible.
And then there's the depths of reality. And the two words that were used for that is miracle,
mystery.
So the shining.
Yes,
and
the
then,
shining forth.
Yeah, so not magic in the pejorative, but the shining forth out into. And then the mystery, which is the withdrawing from into moreness constantly, combinatorially, explosively.
Yes.
And these two
enter forward our sense of realness.
Yes, yeah. So the reason, depths of reason and depths of reality are both working to get us a better grasp of realness.
Yes. The depths of reason are revealed through ecstatic, genuine self-transcendence. Depths of reality revealed through miracle, the shining forth. And between the depths of psyche and the depths of our rationality is where these two are playing. So that interaffordance allows us to resonate with the depths of reason and realness together. It helps them cycle together anagogically, which is an aspiring upward kind of towards ever increasing self-transcendence kind of process, anagage. So symbols are participatory. They open levels of reality and levels of ourselves in a mutual affordant fashion.
In a way that's, so the symbol, it opens reality in ourselves, but are not in a way that's made by us. So that's their
right.
self-organization. So from the internal and the external subconscious. And these symbols can die as well as be reborn again.
Yeah, so these come up through our culture. They come up within ourselves and outside of ourselves in the wider culture. They can indeed be born and die on their own. And, and then he starts to talk about Jonathan Pageau, which is a symbologist, really, really intriguing guy, the way he breaks down modern pop culture, music and movies and things. And he talks about how Christianity is going through a profound rebirth right now.
Well, death and rebirth, and you could use the, what is a story? But a story is an analogy, which is a method in which we can encode information. Well, the story of, the Jesus being betrayed, thrown through, flogged, thrown through the streets, carrying the cross, which is a necessary burden to grow as a person, then dying, then being reborn again. Whether or not you believe that or happened, but that story is encoding this idea, this concept in a way that is digestible to people. And I don't mean digestible like, oh, I can eat it and it's like junk food. No, like digestible that you can integrate,
comprehend it, and then it's appreciable.
It
can
informs you. It forms in you. It informs you. So
and there is this. It does seem to be, and all the world's major spiritual traditions actually speak on this, that there is a process of rebirth that a human being can go through.
Well, a lot of our rituals
are designed for that.
All the way back
Levels
into
of
the
rebirth.
pre-Abrahamic pagan traditions, like the going into caves for a period of time and
The
coming
vision
out.
quest, the coming of age rituals,
The going on the long walk and coming back.
They're all there to help us aid in our self-transcendence, to transcend our previous notions of self, and to be able to take on larger, newer, more agile, amorphous versions
Essentially,
of self.
like your child self dying off intentionally and gracefully in order to birth in your adult self.
Yeah, your young adult self. And then at some point, your young adult
And actually,
self-conception might die.
And aside from, like spiritual traditions and stuff, just natural societal traditions too. We do have those, at different ages and different success points in your life. We have tradition, like when you graduate college, you throw your cap off and you do that kind of thing. It's like, ooh, got that off my head. All right, now I've opened myself up to go out into the world. I don't know if that's exactly what that is, but you can participate in it and you get a feeling of it.
Rituals for every birthday, rituals for when we get married, rituals for when we pass away, even when people pass. We have rituals throughout human existence, that's for sure.
Yeah,
And now we've certainly become less ritualistic as a culture, it seems, at least in a way that deeply affords
I
the
think
cultivation
our
of wisdom.
rituals have become
Habits, addictions.
thinned out and kind of perverted in a little way.
Yeah.
Like we would say, oh, like my morning ritual, get my coffee and take a poop. It's more of a habit, but but we do.
But like sitting down, drinking the coffee, reading the paper.
Well,
could
we
be like
do
a
things
ritual.
like in like popular culture online, like how things go viral. People participate in that very much like a ritual because somebody puts something up, somebody sees it, and then shares it to their localized group. The localized group does the same thing, same behaviors, does it again, and it's repeatable.
So it's almost like we got some junk food rituals in place of really, nutritious rituals.
And certain ends of hazing that are just stupid and don't really do anything because they're just a bastardization of previous rituals that we no longer understand. For fraternity and sorority hazing and stuff like that. But then there's also rituals if you're like a tradesperson and you're new on a crew, they're going to mess with you. They're going to send you to the store with a list of bullshit items to see if you're going to get it. And that's a way of, ingratiating you into their group, right?
Or the first day of class when you do some dumb game and for everyone to kind of get to know each other.
But how conscious are we of these rituals? Why we're doing
how
them,
consciously are we enacting them
yeah,
too?
Yeah. So how much are we actually participating in them and not just
how deeply
doing them?
Yeah.
Because you could have a ritual of for 15 minutes every day when I wake up I pray. Okay, that could be great. That could be great if you're actually really getting into it. Or it could just be something you do because it's rote, and then it's
and
a decaying ritual.
When families and couples and people say "I love you," and sometimes just it's just like a perfunctory, habitual reply, and you don't hear the love in the statement, kind of thing. Like you notice that sometimes, and that's a great example.
But we've lost some rituals like greeting rituals. I've noticed just if you're the first person at the door, you open up the door and the other person says thank you and you say you're welcome. Now, and it switched into no problem because it's like some people feel that saying thank you is a burden that you're expected to do, not realizing that yes, okay, you could see it as a burden, but it's also something that we do to build trust between.
Sure thing, de nada.
Yeah,
it's nothing.
And now it's shifted into no, there's no eye contact. Shaking of the hand is weird. Weird now. It's all trying to figure out: are we going to do the fist bump or the whatever?
So we're trying out new rituals to replace older rituals, and we're still getting used to them. You can see that in the fist bump thing that became even more popular once COVID came around.
Yeah, and then the more time we spend online opposed to out in public, because the shaking of the hand is a ritual that we've developed. So a psychotechnology and ritual form that we've developed to show openness and also gauge a stranger when we do this to signal to somebody or to thanks or I see you on the road.
No weapons, I'm harmless.
Yeah. And
we smile to show that we're nice, that we're happy, we're in a good mood, we're not dangerous right now.
Yeah. So there's been a loss of some of that, and then rebuilding in some other ways, like how we exist online with each other. But when I say they've become perverted, it I don't mean in a sexual sense. I mean taking
become warped.
Yeah, taking a clear water and adding mud into it.
Yeah. Things have definitely gotten muddled, warped, perverted.
It's just interesting, and I'm not sure what the solution or if there is a solution to it because I haven't necessarily gotten my head around the problem yet, not like the issue, the problem, like how it all fits together. So it's because it does bother me because I'm naturally a socially awkward kind of person anyway, and I really had to learn these little rituals that nobody thinks about, but really keep track of them and learn them and then practice them over and over and over and over again so I can exist in normal people world. Peopling's hard. people think it's harder when you're a weird person. So it's like, okay, what do I do? When Vervaeke's talking about, it's like, oh, naturally, you don't worry about how far you are away from somebody, and I
just
do,
automatically.
Am I like 3 steps away, 4 steps away? Are you encroaching upon me? Is that like a anger encroachment, or is that you're attracted to me encroachment, or that is that because you weren't paying attention? It's just like, so. It bothers me that we're losing these rituals because I have to figure out a whole new freaking set, and everybody's acting weird.
Yeah. It's super relatable, brother. Super relatable. So if a symbol is not wrestling with the moreness of reality, it's really not a symbol. Symbols do this. They help us to wrestle with the moreness of reality, to relate with, to conform with. And symbols then will always be transformative, transjective, meaning that they're both subjective and objective at once, beyond both, and transparent because we see through a symbol into a larger reality. So we see the cross and we know it's talking about the infinite love and mercy of Jesus Christ. We see the American flag. We know it symbolizes freedom and liberty and justice for all. So with these symbols mean things.
Yeah.
Much more than what they say on the surface. Like
Sure.
the word tree is, basically a symbol for
Yes.
this thing that is so much more complex than the word tree can possibly encompass. It just points us towards it.
Yeah,
So-
but if I told you to go find a tree,
Yeah, right.
it doesn't
It's
matter what
easy.
kind of tree, you'd find one.
Easy, yeah.
Or
So
if there was
they're
no
useful.
trees, you'd find a big enough
So
bush
they
to say
point us in the
tree.
right
Yeah.
direction, but they can't totally define the thing, and they're not supposed to. They're supposed to be kind of transparent so that we can see through them.
So I think we're at
So
how is this method of correlation?
Yeah, so I was going to say,
realized in us.
so if one is not undergoing participatory transformation with ultimate reality and within their own selves at once, then we're really not doing religion. We're really not doing spirituality. Just saying you believe something is much less important than the actual practice of the way of being that someone like Jesus or Buddha, for instance, embodied and expressed and demonstrated for us. So it is to be in relation to the existential self and the essential self.
Yeah, and essential self being that fullness of being.
The capital S self, you could say, in its fullness of being, that ground of beingness that we all have within us. The existential self is the believed to be self-image that we all have.
Yeah, it's the thing stuck on the sticky ball of the fullness of being, capital S self.
With all of its impressions of reality and everything and all of that.
And so the essential self comes before, not temporarily, but normatively, it comes ahead of the existential self. So almost like, not to bring a bad phrase up, but your true self in you, find your true self, and then your outside self. That's one of those perverted things that we've, that true self, it goes into ego self.
Yep.
It points towards the existential self opposed to the essential self, right? Whereas if you get the essential self and then the outside self in working with each other, the capital S self, too many selves, the capital F self will
like increasingly absorb
enhance
the existential self.
Yeah, and actually give validity to it as well.
It'll help form it into a more honest, healthy expression of itself.
Yeah.
One that the human having that existential self isn't attached to. They're okay with themselves changing. They know that I'm an amorphous thing that's constantly changing, and so that there's no problem then if somebody insults you, for instance. The impacts of other people's judgments and the impacts of matters going on in life in general emotionally impact us less. They throw us less. We can see around our thoughts and emotions more clearly, and we can choose how we respond to any given situation or person.
And I would
Increasingly
assume
more so.
I would also I would assume it would be less stressful as well, because this outside existential self and the big S self are, I don't want to say closer to the same thing, but closer to the same thing.
Yes.
Less sticky Post-it notes all over the capital S.
More the authentic expression of the ground of being as it comes through this person freed, increasingly freed of their egoic attachments and desires and inhibitions and all that. Yeah.
And I don't necessarily think trying to say merge the two into one thing is appropriate. It's about the relationship between the two that facilitates this growing experience.
And the egoic self, it does become increasingly absorbed into, you could say, the essential self. You become more and more the essential self.
Yeah.
As time goes on.
Let's say like the ego aspect would be more and more a useful tool opposed to something that is controlling you.
That one is attached to and identifying with, thinking that they are this cast image, this illusion.
Because like your ego is important. It allows me to tell the difference between me and you, and sometimes gives me the oomph to go, no, I think you're wrong, and here's why. But then if it's healthy as a tool, okay, well, I got that. Let me put it down. What do you think?
Yeah, right.
Because without ego, we'd just be a mush of one thing. We'd all just be
without personalities. It would be boring. Yeah, we would all be the same thing.
Well, there wouldn't be enough space to have this reciprocal relationship that grows.
So the ego should be the dutiful servant to the ground of being, which is our actual true nature. Yeah, the ground of awareness that is within all of us. That the layers of perception of ego are laden over. Yeah.
Yeah. So,
all right, guys. Well, let's jump back in. Section.
And sorry, guys, we're looking a little too yellow.
Are we? You sure it's not your shirt?
No, I'm looking at the white on the back, and it's just I'm messing. The camera's still new.
We are a little bright and bluer now as the night grows. We were like super red when we started the cast, and we had to do some white balance. That's not so bad.
No, once we get the actual studio set up and all that stuff, we'll have a regular thing going on, and I'll know what this camera can do because I'm still like, technology.
We're still learning. All right, Charles. Well, let's jump back into John Vervaeke's Awakening from the Meaning Crisis, number 50. I can't believe we've made it this far.
This is the end.
We're almost there. All right, let's go, guys. Here we are.
So the sacred second self, and for Tillich, this is bound up with, like, when St. Paul is talking about, the old. Remember when we talked about agape, I used to be this way, I acted like a kid, and now here's the new way, I act like a man. This is the way of agape. So my salience landscape is sophrosun. It naturally self-organizes to constantly tempt me towards the good. And Tillich wrote a very excellent little book on agape. I highly recommend it to you. So, this aspirational, transformative journey of encouragement, literally embodying courage, encouragement, gets us to confront seriously meaninglessness. Now, in the Courage to Be, Tillich goes through various historical developments. In the ancient world, the meaningless is confronted in our being as the finitude of our being. And he talks about how the Stoics responded to that. And then he talks about during the Christian period, and especially during the Protestant Reformation, right? Because Tillich is deeply influenced by Lutheranism, in a very critical way, though, of course. And the meaningless is confronted within our self-knowing as guilt. And he talks about the Protestant Reformation as an attempt to seriously respond to the issue of guilt. And then now, in our current period, right, we are experiencing meaninglessness in ourself as despair. And he represents that, he says that is being represented by the existentialists. Of course, Tillich is writing in the period of the 50s and the 60s when existentialism was still more prevalent. We, of course, can talk about things following on existentialism if we had more time, like postmodernism and other things that are not representing, that's not the right word, discussing and articulating a deeper way in which we are embodying the meaning crisis. But nevertheless, you can follow this trajectory through the Courage to Be. You can go through, you can go through the Stoics, you can go through the Protestant Christians, you can go into the existentialists. And this trajectory leads us to a position beyond all three, the position that Tillich is arguing for, which he calls the response to faith. Remember, faith is da'ath for Tillich. It is not the willful assertion of belief. And here's the thing, and this is why idolatry is so pernicious for Tillich. The no-thingness of God coming to really encounter the no-thingness of God is central to this notion of faith. The no-thingness of God takes into itself the no-thingness, right? So, no, sorry, I misspoke. The no-thingness, let me change how I'm pronouncing these terms because it will help. The no-thingness of God takes into itself the nothingness of meaninglessness, and it overcomes it. The no-thingness of God has a transformative power over the nothingness of despair. So this is the notion of a fundamental aspect identity shift. And here's where, if I had time, and I'll bring it out when I get into this other series, I would talk about Nishitani, because his book of Religion and Nothingness is an extended, philosophically profound examination of this fundamental aspect shift, identity shift. Remember what an aspect shift is. Remember the Necker cube, right? You're looking at something and the thing doesn't change, but the aspect by which you're seeing it changes. It flips. And what's salient, what's foreground and background. But this isn't just a shift of aspect. That's why I'm creating this neologism, right? It's an aspect identity shift. What does it mean? You come to see the no-thingness of God. You come to experience it as the inexhaustible creation of meaning. It is an inexhaustible fount of meaning cultivation. It is the ground of meaning, intelligibility, the relationship between them, etc. for Tillich. Nishitani thinks the same thing can be found within Buddhism, that when we deeply realize the no-thingness of shunyata, when we participate it, when we identify with it, we gain the competence, the ability to aspect shift the nothingness of meaninglessness, so that we come to see it instead as pointing to its ground, which is an inexhaustible source of meaning cultivation that cannot be drained dry by our despair. There is a fecundity at the level of fundamental framing and the way it's coupled to being that cannot be drained dry by despair. When we stop trying to push away the nothingness, but have instead an imaginal relationship to it and move through it anagogically in an imaginal fashion with the nothingness of God, then we overcome meaninglessness. We overcome meaninglessness. Nietzsche bumped up against this, right? He got close to it. If you stare long enough into the abyss, it begins to stare long enough into you. But you know what Nietzsche didn't do? He didn't stare long enough. He didn't look deeply enough. That's Nishitani's critique of Nietzschean nihilism. This fundamental aspect shift in which the nothingness of despair is transformed into the revelation of no-thingness as inexhaustible being meaning. This takes, and Tillich talks about the mystical tradition. There's a term from Gregory of Nyssa, from the Eastern Orthodox Neoplatonic tradition. And you see it also in John Scotus Erigena, right? Picks it up. This notion of epictasis, which is such a cool sounding word. It sounds so cool anyways. So this is the idea. So there's a sort of standard, I suppose you might call it a teleological model of sort of salvation, right? Where the point is, you know, I'm moving towards a final destination, the promised land, in which I will see God and I will come to rest in the promised land. So, you know, the whole point of a purpose is, right, that it self-dissolves. When I've achieved my purpose, I've realized my goal, then the pursuit has ended. But Gregory of Nyssa and Erigena have this different notion of epictasis. So here you're not trying to rest in God. God is not ultimately had, even in resting in him. Instead, what the human being is engaging in, now for them there's a mythos of this continues on after your death, in a life after death, and I'll put that aside. But nevertheless, the notion here of infinite self-transcendence in the infinity of God, right? There is no resting. There is only the constant disclosure of the inexhaustibleness of the ground of being. The transjectivity and the transframing never stop. They never stop. So, the method of correlation and the encouragement are therefore emphasized as transjective in nature. Tillich explicitly and repeatedly argues that the symbol joins together and grounds, it joins together but also grounds the subjective and the objective. He talks about how even Nietzsche uses this in the notion of will to power. Nietzsche, in his notion of will to power, is trying to use something that is, right, has a subjective meaning, will, but also like the will to power in existence, the way everything is sort of, right, like Spinoza's Conatus, like pushing itself and maintaining itself in existence. He's trying to get something that bridges between the subjective and the objective. And this is one of the ways in which, therefore, Tillich is different than Jung. And there's criticism in Tillich of Jung, also appreciation of Jung, right? Tillich sees, of course, the process of individuation, very similar to the way Jung does. And this, right, this is perhaps the more subjective side of the symbolic imaginal relationship. But Tillich always, and this is the tonos again, always puts that into creative tension with participation, not just in groups, although he's not excluding that, but this is your participation in being. And he relates that to, and this is really interesting, neither the autonomy of being, sorry, that's wrong word, autonomy of reason emphasized in the Enlightenment, nor what he calls, right, a heteronomous, or sometimes he even uses the more religious term, the demonic imposition of authority from without. And see how this just so beautifully lines up with the problem of aspiration, right? Remember, it can't be something that just slams you from the outside that you passively receive. It can't be something that you just autonomously make, or you don't actually get genuine self-creation, or what I would call self-transcendence. Tillich sees this overcome in what he calls a theonomos, which literally means God-ordered, God-governed. But of course, God here means the ground of being, the ongoing epictasis of the inexhaustible, the affordance, right, of ongoing transframing. So what we see here is transjectivity, the sacred second self. We see the anagogic ascent joining reason and revelation together, and the fundamental aspect shift, the deep criticism of fundamentalism and literalism. And there is, of course, therefore, something that is deeply about gnosis. And the connection to Gnosticism and the transgression of theism is explicit in Tillich. Tillich talks about this whole process, and this is why I qualified so much the use of the word theonomous. He qualifies this whole process as the process in which we are responding deeply to the meaning crisis. He calls this as a realization of the God beyond the God of theism. The God beyond the God of theism, which is a deeply transgressive statement. It's very Gnostic in the sense of seeing God as that which is the demiurge entrapping us within existential entrapment, the existential entrapment of the meaning crisis. This whole process is so transjective and so transformative in nature that, and it is so deeply resistant to literalism, fundamentalism, and idolatry, that it is going to take us to the God beyond the God of theism. This is the non-theism of Tillich. Non-theism is a position that tries to transcend theism and atheism. Many people are talking about it now. There's related ideas like atheism, which is sort of the kind of theism that you get after going through atheisms. I think this is a better way of talking about it, non-theism. Non-theism is the correct and appropriate way, as I've already mentioned, of talking about religions like Buddhism and Taoism. Non-theism is the rejection of the presuppositions that are shared by both theism and atheism. I will go into this in much greater detail in another series. Let me just give you, and this is not an exhaustive list. It is just a preliminary list, but nevertheless, I think a good starting point. What are four shared presuppositions between the classical theist and the atheist? Number one, God is the supreme being. The theist accepts that, gives a yes to that, and the atheist gives a no to it, but they both accept that proposition as the one they are debating about. The non-theist rejects that. Number two, God is accessed primarily or even solely through belief. The theist and the atheist agree to this. They just disagree about whether or not there's really any access to be found. The non-theist rejects both of these. Number three, theology or anti-theology, which is what atheism often engages in, although I'm not equating atheism to anti-theology, but theology and anti-theology do not require transformative anagoge. All you need to do is have possession of the propositions and be able to infer the correct implications, thereby losing everything that we've been talking about in these last 4 episodes. The theist and the atheist agree with that proposition. The non-theist rejects it. Number 4, sacredness is personal or impersonal. The theist and the atheist disagree about which one of those to pick. The theist says it's personal. The atheist says it's impersonal. I agree that, trying to say that the atheist has nothing that functions like sacredness in their life it just does not sit with their performative existence. But I do agree when the atheist says that they do not share the theist notion of sacredness as something fundamentally personal. The non-theist rejects that. The non-theist rejects that sacredness is personal or impersonal. Rather, because the non-theist rejects the Cartesian grammar that drives it, the non-theist argues that sacredness is transjective, participatory. It is aspirational. This is what Tillich was going on about. My main criticism of Tillich is, although in one way he's way more practical than Heidegger and he's giving us guidance on how to live, how to cultivate courage and faith, he does not offer practices of transformation. See, Jung actually created a practice, intrapsychic though it might be, he created a practice for enacting and cultivating the imaginal. He created active imagination, which is not just to, in an imaginary sense, call up images. It's not just to conceptually think about things, it's to allow images to self-organize in an autopoetic fashion such that the depths of the psyche are revealed, so that the self and the ego can talk to each other. Jung creates a practice of active imagination. He creates a practice of dream interpretation, and that is sadly missing in Tillich. Tillich is better than Heidegger, I would argue, in that Tillich gives us a way to live, courage, and faith, deeply reinterpreted, but he does not give us the processes that Jung gives us.
Break time. All right, we're going to recount what we just went through. Some good stuff there, man. I really like where he's taking this. So,
Encouragement, embodying
yes,
courage.
the transformational, aspirational journey of encouragement, the instilling of courage, gets us to seriously confront the phenomenon of meaninglessness that we can experience in the world. And in the past, that meaninglessness was confronted within us as guilt, and we responded as such, as we would. And then now we are experiencing meaninglessness within ourselves as kind of a despair, a nihilistic despair. So once again, we're revisiting this idea and going deeper into this idea that faith is meant to express an idea, not an assertion of belief, but a commitment to an ideal, a way of being. And so to really encounter the no-thangness of God, to overcome meaninglessness, the nothingness of despair, there must be a fundamental aspect shift, an aspect identity shift.
Yeah, so
So we're talking about God as this no-thangness that helps us, that answers the nothingness. So what do we mean by no-thangness? It's beyond all things. It is the fount of all things. It is the infinite source, the constantly generative source of all things. Okay, so now we can move a little bit
so
ahead. So go ahead.
the quote that he has there is, the nothingness of God takes into itself the nothingness of despair. And when he uses this term, the inexhaustible fount of meaning cultivation, the fount, it's a fount. It cannot be drained dry.
Yes.
And he mentioned, Nietzsche with his, when you stare into the abyss stares back into you. Well, Vervaeke's saying he didn't stare long enough to see the no thing in the nothingness.
Yes, and this is Nishitani's critique as well, and he was a Buddhist philosopher and scholar, and so his critique of Nietzschean nihilism was that he didn't stare long enough. The revelation of nothingness is that it is an inexhaustible fount of being, or that the source of no-thangness,
of meaning cultivation.
Yes. An inexhaustible fount for the sense of deepening sense of being and meaningfulness. So then we look back at the philosopher Nyssa.
Yeah, Gregory of Nyssa.
Gregory of Nyssa, and his term epictasis.
Yeah, epoctasis.
I think it's EPEC, so epictasis.
Epictasis.
Yeah.
Okay, so
moving towards the promised land, moving towards God, not trying. And so this is really important. Not trying to merely rest and abide with this ground of being, or with God, but an infinite self-transcendence, basically suggesting there is no cap to enlightenment.
There's two, I guess, translations of this term. One would be the movement towards, like the ultimate place, the goal realization, and you rest. What Gregory of Nyssa was saying is that there's no resting. It's just this constant disclosure of the inexhaustible ground of being.
This is an important
point. So it's not I get there and I'm in robes and sit on thrones and that kind of thing in heaven when I'm done. No,
right.
It's
or not that you merely bask in the bliss of of the sense of oneness that you get when you merge with the ground of being, when you experience that self-realization.
Well, notice you can see this in a very like practical, actual ways. Say like a professional athlete, one of the greatest in the world and everything. They never get to the point where they're the best they're ever going to be. Well, they never knowingly get there. It's always I'm trying to be better. Eventually, as you age and things happen, it starts going down. But that doesn't mean you can't still become better, even though maybe you're not performing at the same level still. So it's not like, okay, I'm the champ, I'm done. It's like, well, no, you got to fight for the next championship and keep going and keep going and keep going. There's no end spot. And that was, something when I was younger that I grappled with the Protestant idea of, heaven. And the Baptists, I think, have the most distilled version of this. But you go up to heaven, everything's great, you got your robes, everybody's happy, you sit on these thrones, it's blissful, you're done. That scares the crap out of me. Like what my mind goes towards is it'd be infinitely disclosing. The more I know, the more I become. The more I'll know, and the more I will become, continuously. And the idea of until I am God again. Well, if God is infinitely everything beyond, it's not everything. It's no thing. It's before, after.
It's the source of things. Yeah.
That will take an infinity of infinities. My brain handles that a lot better than, oh, I'm dead, I did good, I guess I'm gonna sit here and like hang out with all the other good people.
Right. Yeah.
I'm like, oh, man, that freaks me out. So one thing that this series has helped me with is like, I don't have to look at my religious, upbringing and Christianity the way that it was taught to me early on. I can dig into it. It's a lot deeper than what you would assume looking at it on the surface.
Yeah. It's really easy just to read something literally and then just believe it because you're afraid of going to hell. But if you realize, and of course, we all know this too. We all know that Jesus was teaching a way of being. We know that we're encouraged to follow the way of Jesus. We're just not putting that as the paramount importance, I think. If we really were, then of course this world would be much better. And it's hard for us because we are not perfect beings. We weren't born perfect angels at the end of evolution. We're in the midst of this story, and we're co-creators. We are co-writers of this story with this free will that we act through. So, we are doing much better than I think we give ourselves credit for.
Oh, well,
We look at how far we've come.
Well, we're still here, and we haven't scrubbed ourselves off of this beautiful rock we call home.
But of course, we're not perfect yet either. And, I think maybe we can tamper down our expectations.
Nor will we ever be perfect, but what's to stop us from trying?
Oh, and what a cool idea that there's infinite room to grow. Yeah. We can always improve. There is no ultimate cap. And this is the same thing with the idea when we first learn about these terms like enlightenment or self-transcendence, realization and all that. We think that it means that, okay, one day you wake up and you feel one with everything and you're done.
Well,
but that's not
that's
it.
where the term woke, you're at this point. Like, back before.
It's an ongoing process. There is no cap.
Yeah, before the term woke is being used the way it is being used now, back when, the liberal left used to have it, and it was almost like a joking phrase. I remember at one of the coffee shops, the owner's son who started working there, like I said some smart ass thing that I say, and he was just like, "Oh, that's woke." And before woke was the naughty word, I looked at him, I'm like, never. He was like, "I'm sorry, I haven't had my coffee." But something felt wrong yet again.
Let us never declare ourselves woke. Let us always be awakening.
I don't like the idea of done.
No. And it's actually a beautiful realization when you're like, oh, there is no cap to enlightenment. One can always continually understand and improve. There's infinite room for our growth.
Yeah, and I think we have to be careful, too, of not interpreting and embodying the idea of, well, there's still this frame limit, so in order to keep growing, you have to fall. All civilization must fall because there's only so much you can grow before you fall. Yes, within framings, that is true, but what we're trying to get to here is being able to expand your frame from within the frame something bigger and move into that, and then frame
and
that.
Be comfortable with that transframing process of constantly reframing our conceptions, our
and
views
not
of
saying
reality.
There isn't a certain cyclical cycle of ups and downs. I'm not saying that at all, because that would just be.
But
stupid.
we can certainly soften the fall.
Yeah,
I think
or
if we're on a trajectory where civilization is following,
why
we can actually create the new system that makes this existing one obsolete alongside it. We can even build it as scaffolding around the existing civilizations, so that we have something new to move into that is already being built, that is already being ready, that we can hang on to rather than all just fall. I think that we certainly can soften this
Maybe we can make
process.
it, kind of like in Calvin and Hobbes. There's the scenes where he's talking about some like really profound stuff, but he's falling down the
Yes,
hill,
yes,
sledding,
yes. I
sledding
love
down the
those,
hill,
man.
and
Yeah.
the end is like, they go
They're
shooting
seasonal
off and-
too. Like during the spring and the summer, he's on his wagon.
but
During the
still.
wintertime, he's on the sled.
That's interesting. I wonder if he intentionally did that. It's like
Every single one of those is always some really deep kind of philosophical introspection Calvin's having in his conversation with Hobbes, his
Well, there's
imaginary
something to be
friend,
said about like
stuffed animal.
when times are good, we tend to not delve as deeply into meaning. But when we're going down fast, we really start to think about these things.
Yes, those are
If
really
we do it right,
deep.
we can gracefully.
Because right after they crash and they actually survived,
Yeah.
then he always has the eureka moment where he understands,
Yeah.
kind of, and puts together all that he was wondering as they were having the fall.
Yeah, Calvin and Hobbes is in my mind a secret kind of magical primer
Absolutely.
for
man. Yeah.
this type of thought for
He's
younger
doing
people and older
some
people.
benevolent
like-
culture jacking there, I think, for sure.
And a very silly, approachable, easily assimilated way too. The lessons get in without you realizing it. Because like
Yes.
Calvin, if you've never seen Calvin and Hobbes, it's cool. But he's this little kid, spiky hair, and he'll sometimes play the tyrant. He'd be like, if I had my way, I would crush all the girls, and like.
Or he's playing the hero, spaceman
Yeah,
spiff.
yeah,
Yeah,
spaceman.
sometimes he's the Tyrannosaurus Rex.
Yeah,
He's
yeah.
like wrecking the lunch cafeteria room.
So he's like all options that you could possibly be, and like it just like it's watching a kid run through all these
Trying on all
high
these
level
different-
ideas at a childhood
Okay.
play level, which Calvin and Hobbes is like probably like one of the core pieces of media or literature that shaped who I am
That
today.
definitely helped shape me too, man. I had every one of those books. I used to read them every single Sunday.
Dude.
And,
Oh
and,
yeah,
like,
man.
I was on it, man. Yeah. I had all of the books, man. And I actually learned to draw comic strip style characters off of Bill Watterson's style of drawing in Calvin and Hobbes.
Oh, you had two cats named Calvin and Hobbes too.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. I had Calvin. James had Hobbes.
Yeah.
James and Lily had Hobbes.
So
Yeah. But they were brothers. Yeah.
Tillich's ideal of
In their way.
what a symbol or idea of what a symbol is and what a symbol does. So the symbol grounds the subjective and the objective.
It grows. It grows the meaning of both of those two, the sense of both of those.
Because it's not just subjective or objective, it's both and something that's transjective. And the symbol helps with that transjective movement.
Yes, that transjective realization, that is the culmination of the objective and subjective realizations. So individuation is an atonos kind of relationship, an opponent processing kind of relationship with participation and beingness. So neither the autonomy of reason nor the heteronomous, the sameness, or the demonic imposition of authority from without. It can't be something that's passively received, nor something that's simply made out of some intentional having mode orientation.
Well, that the symbol is something that grows and has a life of its own. So it's not just a made thing. It's almost discovered in a way.
Yes, and so the meaninglessness in life must be overcome then, and as Tillich puts it, through a theonomus. Theonomus? Or theonomus?
The way I read it, it looks like the
Theonomous.
theonomous, yes.
Theonomous.
The God ordered
Or God governed.
Yeah,
And
but-
God is in the inexhaustible, ongoing
yeah,
fount
the
that we are in a trans-framing relationship with.
yeah the ground of being, if you want to
Yes.
say, which is
The source of all beingness and creation, you could say as well.
yeah, which Vervaeke, brought the secret, sacred self, this aspect shift, gnosis, all these things we've been talking about. So,
All of this that Vervaeke has been doing, again, for all watching, if you're new to this series, is to help create a shared language so that our various spiritual systems and our cultures that have been clashing and ongoing quite a lot lately, coming together and intermixing as well in a rapidly accelerating fashion over the past few centuries in particular, all of our cultures, various spiritual systems are coming into conversation, and we need a shared language to talk about these various ways of transcendence, self-transcendence, and the processes and the parts along the path of the religious experience.
I think
To have the terms to be able to talk about them
Yeah.
together, and then also to help remarry the sense of the sacred, the religious experience or spirituality with science,
Yeah.
because those two need not be
Well, I
broken.
think that's where that the meaning making wiki that he talked about is going to be really
Yes.
helpful. Particularly people like us are just trying to study it and understand it ourselves. So you'd be able to find terms, how they're used,
Yeah.
which people are talking about that idea, because the term theonomous is a symbol for, well,
What we had just talked about there. Yeah.
yeah, which is just barely touching on what it actually is, and that's why we
Yeah.
have long conversations about it to encode meaning into these symbols.
Yes.
Um,
Yes. So the theonomous is like a transjective relationship with that inexhaustible fount of meaning, that source of creation.
yeah, and so
And so he's speaking of God and a realization of the God beyond the God of theism.
yeah.
Now, I don't want anyone out there that believes in God from any various paths to think that this is atheistic by any means, because it's not. It's saying that there is an absolute source that we cannot define. It's indefinable. It's infinite, so perfectly infinite. And it is the source of our vision of God that we have come up with. And these different visions of God have been warring with each other. We have to see that God is the inexhaustible fount of all of our belief systems. That's what I think he's trying to get at.
yeah, and beyond
the God beyond the God of
beyond
theism,
theism
beyond the God of all the different
and
religious
atheism
belief systems.
as well, because
Yes.
Vervaeke
Yes.
gets into,
Because it's not merely some old guy in the sky personality kind of
Yeah.
God that we're talking about here.
but Vervaeke does get into some of the core suppositions that both theist and atheist will agree on, as far as except they're either yes this is or no it is not, but they still have the same idea.
And so this is to explain what non-theism or anatheism is.
Yeah,
And
opposed
so-
to atheism or theism. So
Yes, because the anatheism or non-theism, both meaning the same thing, it transcends atheism and theism. And it rejects the presuppositions of both schools of belief.
yeah,
So such as
the non-theist rejects the idea that God is or isn't the supreme being, or God is or isn't accessed solely through belief, or
well, let's go the other way around on it.
Well, hold
it's
on.
hard to explain that.
Hold on. So the first one is God. The non-theist rejects the notion that God is or isn't the supreme being. The atheist will say God is not the supreme being. The theist will say God is the supreme being, right?
Yes.
And the non-theist is like, well, it's not about the supreme being thing, right?
Yes, that's right. Yeah. So both the theist and the atheist are both saying that there's this God idea of God as a supreme being.
Yeah, and the atheist
I
says,
believe
I
in
don't
it.
believe in that.
I believe in it as a theist. The atheist is like, well, I don't believe in there being a
So
God.
they both believe the supposition,
but
when-
they're both
yeah.
talking about God as a supreme
Yeah.
being kind of idea of God.
So the
not
sec-
an exhaustible fount.
Yeah, exactly. So the second one that the non-theist rejects is God is accessed solely through belief. Now the
Right.
theist would say you have to believe to have have access to God.
They're basically acknowledging that the theists think that accessing God is through belief.
yeah, and the non-theist says, well, whatever, I don't care about
Yeah.
your beliefs, and who's to say
It's
that you
beyond
have
your
it
beliefs.
right and you have to believe in God.
Yeah.
But still, the idea that access to God, whether you believe in God or not, is through
Access through belief. Yeah.
So that's-
we're saying So
that's
the
a supposition they don't-
the non-theist or the anatheist. So beyond both atheism and theism, person is saying that God is not accessed through belief.
Yeah.
Alone. It's beyond it's beyond that. And
Yeah.
so both, because both the theists and the atheists are both agreeing that in this notion that this is how religion is practiced. It's through belief.
yeah.
You know. Okay, so now theology.
and atheism do not require this is both theist and atheist
Oh,
don't
yeah.
really require that there be a transformative anagoge.
That's right.
Um,
You just got to proclaim or assert
yes.
your belief.
And then the last one he mentioned is sacred, the supposition that sacredness is personal or impersonal. So the theist would believe it's a personal thing, and the atheist would be like, well, I'll worship trees and rocks and things, and it's not a personal, it's not person, or it's just not.
Yeah, they disagree over which one it is, personal or impersonal.
Yeah.
And basically the non-theist or the anatheist is coming along and saying that's it's kind of both and
Yeah, and sacredness
not
is
either.
aspirational, right?
Yeah.
You aspire to the more sacred, to
Yeah, we recognize it's an orientation as a way of being, not a belief. Again, yeah, and or merely a personal or impersonal experience alone.
yeah, and I guess
Rather, it's not dualistic, and so this is separating from the two worlds mythology that we've all been caught up in for the last 2,000 plus years. We're thinking that everything is separate. And this idea is recognizing the inherent oneness of all things. The interrelating opposites are actually part of one thing, such as the yin yang symbol shows us. You can't have a sense of temperature without a sense of hot or cold, for instance. So we need the interrelating opposites for reality to even exist. So there is an inherent oneness to all of reality. And so so the non-theist, the anatheist is saying, no, it's neither one or the other. It's both and, if anything. So it's a transjective, participatory, aspirational process, a dance with the one thing.
yeah. So Vervaeke, I guess where we left off is Vervaeke had a critique of Tillich, and he used Nietzsche. And Nietzsche had a practice, various practices, like
And Jung.
dream not
Is
Nietzsche,
Jung, yeah.
excuse me, Jung. Like dream interpretation. There's this practice that Tillich lacks. What Tillich gave us, though, is kind of an explanation of a way to live without the practice, right? And I'm assuming where we're going is somebody's going to pick up and be like, hey, move on in the conversation. Well, develop a practice. I don't know, but that seems to be how these things go.
It's probably where he's going to be
Yeah,
bringing
so
Barfield in.
that's all I got on here.
All right, y'all, we're going to jump back in now.
Oh,
If
man.
you're enjoying the series, make sure you hit
Theist,
that like and
atheist, and
subscribe.
non-theists.
Yeah, right. I know. That's hard to talk about, man. All these terms, all these symbols. Yeah, so if you guys are enjoying the show, make sure you like and subscribe. And if you appreciate what we're sharing here of John Vervaeke's work, make sure to go over to John Vervaeke's channel and like and subscribe as well. There's so much that comes after this Awakening series that he's already released. And so you really actually get into the actionable side of things now. And that's exciting. That's where the rubber meets the road. So, all right, Shaw, we jumping back.
You use symbology in a metaphor.
I did indeed.
Which is an analogy for something else.
Yes.
We're doing it all the time.
All the time, always. We always are using metaphors. Every sentence has a metaphor. What's a metaphor?
Yeah, what's the metaphor?
All right, fam. We jumping. Let's go.
This notion of deep symbolic participation that is translated into practices, I think goes to the heart of Owen Barfield's work. So Barfield is one of the Inklings. He is part of the ongoing discussion and fellowship between Tolkien and C.S. Lewis, of course Barfield, Charles Williams. Those are the core four, and then a bunch of other people. I would recommend 3 books to try and get a better sense of Barfield. Lost Knowledge of the Imagination by Lachman, which I've already recommended to you. The Fellowship, The Literary Lives of the Inklings, and there's that word Inkling again. The Literary Lives of the Inklings by Philip Zaleski and, is it Carol Zaleski? There's the 2 Zaleskis, anyways. That's a very good book. And then the book I would most heartily recommend, it's a book that I'm finding brilliant. It's the book Owen Barfield, Philosophy, Poetry, and Theology by D. Fasusia. All of this will come up, of course, on the panels. So couple of things. Barfield is definitely influenced by Gnosticism. He's influenced by Rudolf Steiner, and I won't go into it. You can read the book in depth. Steiner has, like, I'll either say too little or too much about Steiner. It's a mystery to many people, myself included, why Barfield was so taken with Steiner and thought so highly of him. But if you reinterpret Steiner as basically a modern Gnostic who's generating a Gnostic mythology, the two worlds and the divine spark and all this kind of stuff, then you understand perhaps why Barfield was so enamored with Steiner. I think Steiner was the vehicle whereby Gnosticism comes into Barfield's thinking. So Barfield is therefore influenced by Gnosis. He's influenced by Neoplatonism through Coleridge, the Romantic poet who also engages in some important philosophy. De Fusia makes very clear, this is one of the most profound parts of the book, the deep indebtedness that Coleridge had to the early Romantics or the post-Kantians, people that follow Kant and go on a different path from the later Romantics and Hegel. So a prototypical figure here from these early Romantics or post-Kantians is somebody like Schlegel. And what these early Romantics emphasized is they emphasized the infinity, of reality. This is really interesting. I find it so. Infinity, right? When I'm trying to get the non-finiteness, the lack of being bound, being fully frameable, rather than just being uncountable. Although I'm alluding, of course, again to combinatorial explosion. So they emphasize the infinity of reality. And this term is used by them and by de Fusia and his examination of Owen Barfield. This is the inexhaustibleness, the inexhaustible moreness. And the idea is that the inexhaustible moreness is that which continually draws us, constantly draws us and affords us into self-transcendence. That inexhaustible moreness. So Schlegel had a way of putting this, the finite longing for the infinite. The finite longing for the infinite. It is this eduction, I'm using this word to draw out, right? Which of course became our word, education, which if we think of education aspirationally is fine, the way Callard does. It is this eduction that discloses or reveals the sacredness. So our transjectivity, our finite, right? There's there's the epicstasis, our epistatic, right? Trajectory, our finite, our always framed longing for the transframing that discloses, but never completely discloses, the combinatorially explosive, inexhaustible moreness of reality, and simultaneously discloses the ongoing capacity of relevance realization to adapt to that in a coupled manner. We experience and we participate. I'm using this as a transitive verb. We experience and participate this in creativity. Not creativity just in the sense of making, but the creativity in you experience in the flow state. See how this is different from the later Romantics? This is not to find the contact in realness in some irrational locus in the psyche, or in Hegel as the dialectic of a system, a propositional system, but instead is to find sacredness in the flow of self-transcendence within creativity. And this is what is meant by poesis, what we translate as poetry. Barfield picks up on this poiesis as ecstasis in creativity, the way we stand beyond ourselves in creativity. And he's very clear about how this is, right? It's a transformative experience. There's a felt change in consciousness. The self after is both continuous and discontinuous from the self before the transformative experience. All that stuff we've been talking about with the sacred second self and aspiration. There's an ecstasis within the there's an ecstasis in creativity. There's an ecstasis in creativity found within poetry and the poetical aspects of everyday language that can reawaken us to this kind of connectedness. 2, the inexhaustibleness, a connectedness that experiences it as sacredness. So, Barfield looks at words, the etymology, the history of words. And I touched on this briefly earlier when I was talking about symbols, and I made some sort of criticisms of Barfield, which I noted at the time were preliminary and promissory, and I promised to come back to them in more depth as a way of trying to both defend my criticism, but also to defend a deeper reading of Barfield. So you remember, the idea here is we have a word like pneuma, the Greek, or spiritus. And Barfield knows if you go for us, right, so for the Greeks, or for the Latins, for the Romans, for spiritus, it can mean both wind, or what we now think of the word spirit, sort of the self-moving aspects of the psyche. And we divide it into, right, spirit is this. We really can't see it that way, but there's a division here, and for Barfield, this division replicates the sort of Cartesian division between the objective world of like wind and the subjective world of what's going on in the psyche in its self-movement or its self-contact. But what Barfield says is when you go back, there isn't this, right? These terms are used and they're treated as if they have a kind of identity. What I would argue is a non-logical identity, but but they're not. They interpenetrate. They interafford each other. These meanings that we see as so antithetical, so disjunctive with respect to each other. For Barfield, people who use the word that way were engaged in a form of participation. This is a way of being before the division, before the Cartesian disjunction. I would argue that what Barfield is pointing to is that these people had a more transjective anagogic resonance with reality, so that the wind is imaginal for them in that it discloses the self-moving aspects of reality and themselves in a highly resonant fashion. The reason I want to say that is because I'm not quite sure about his evolutionary hypothesis. I pointed to the work of Lakoff and Johnson that show we, unlike the people of the ancient past, we use language in this fashion, a way that is pervasive through all of our cognition and speech. Words have these dual meanings, an inner and outer meaning. I pointed to work that I've published on and the work that they've published on, how we use the word attack. There's many examples. This is only one. That's the point. There's many of these examples. We use the word attack, and we mean, right, physical destruction. Like, I attack the castle. Or at least the intent to physically destroy. But we also mean critical argumentation. Like he attacked that point that I just made. And we don't feel they're not logically identical, but we don't feel them as, radically disjunctive from each other. Notice we do it with this. Sorry. Yes, I want to do it that way. There's something here, and we'll use the word see, and we can use that to mean either, right, visual experience, but we can use see to mean to understand. And then that converges back. We can use, right? We can use understand, or originally unterstand, but we changed it to understand, and that can mean to stand under, but it can also mean conceptual understanding. And so there's a weird synonymy between understand and see. I'm trying to point out to you how complex this is. Now, what's interesting about Lakoff and Johnson is they don't claim this is an evolutionary thing, pointing to ancient ways of being conscious. This is something pervasive in our cognition and our culture right now, and it doesn't point to the evolution across generations. It points to psychological development within individuals. Psychological development within individuals. According to Lakoff and Johnson, we start out in sensory motor seeing, and then that gets taken up into this conceptual sense of seeing. We start with a sensory motor way of understanding, that gets taken up. We start as a sensory motor way of attacking, and that gets taken up. It's a psychological process of development, and it is ongoing right now, and it is pervasive. There might be something sort of fundamentally wrong, therefore, with Barfield's evolutionary analysis. Now, Vervaeke and Kennedy argue that the psychological development is deeper and than as being represented by Lakoff and Johnson. We argue that the model is too simplistic. As I mentioned, we argue that there should be a top-down aspect to this psychological development, not just bottom-up. So there's a sense in which we agree with Lakoff and Johnson that there's stuff coming up from the sensory, but we think, and here's the influence of Corbin, right? Especially on me. I don't know if there's an influence on John Kennedy, but definitely on me. Here's the abstract intellectual, and here's the concrete sensory, and then they meet together in the imaginal. That when I say I see what you're saying, this is an imaginal way that's getting a bottom up from seeing as a sensory motor thing, and then bringing into imaginal expression this abstract, not yet speakable sense of understanding. That helps to explain why these two very different sensory motor things, verbal experience, standing other, or a totally different one, grasping, or yet another one, getting. Why do all of these converge? Because there is something like an intellectual form that they converge upon, but it is also expressed, developed through these different imaginal renderings that connect back to concrete instances of the sensory motor. So I argued that we can link that to Michael Anderson's notion of the massive redeployment hypothesis, the circuit reuse, cognitive acceptation. I went through this idea of how the symbolic, now you can understand it as the imaginal, is this process of re-acceptation. How I can invoke balance. I can invoke balance to talk about justice. And then I have the image, not an imaginary, the imaginal statue of Lady Justice as a way of using, re-accepting the physical balance machinery and using that machinery to give a structural functional organization to this hard to articulate, ineffable sense of justice. Recycling that whole process and deducing new functions. It's an enacted metaphor, it's an enacted symbol. This is poiesis, I think, in its deepest sense. This helps to explain the translucency of the symbol, why we can see through it, see it and see through it. I can look at it as physical balance, but I can see through it into justice. And justice and balance are not logically identical, but they're not separate from each other. It also explains our temptation to literalism and idolatry. We can forget justice and focus just on having balance. We can lose the iconic seeing through and only look at the concrete. Now, back to Barfield's evolutionary schema. He talks about that we had original participation, and then there's the division, which is the meaning crisis. And he's really explicit about the meaning crisis. Read the opening essay in The Rediscovery of Meaning. He's really clear about that. And we have the two worlds mythology, and we have everything is being broken up. The inner and the outer are being separated, the subjective, the objective, blah, blah, blah. You know all of this. But the idea is, what we need to do is to move to what he calls final participation as a response to the meaning crisis. Final participation is a recovery of participation integrated within the gains of the rational sciences. Now, he says that, and that's explicitly and importantly what he means, and I take him at his word. Part of what that means, and this is what he emphasizes, is the recovery of the perspectival and the participatory. And I think that is deeply right and deeply consonant. But here's where I'm critical of Barfield. But I think it also means, and this is where Barfield does not do, I think, good work, it also means a science of meaning cultivation. How does that participatory and perspectival participation, right, fit into our scientific processes, our scientific way of being? If you're going to integrate in final participation with the scientific rational mind, both sides have to be involved in this marriage, or it will fail. That, of course, is what I've tried to do with relevance realization theory, and then put it into discourse with spirituality, symbolism, sacredness, and these great prophets of the meaning crisis. Now, here's more of a criticism of Barfield's followers. I think there needs to be more understanding of how much Barfield is indebted to Coleridge and Schlegel, and understanding sacredness as a poiesis participation of the inexhaustible within transformative creativity. You can't simply import Barfield into classical theism and say, oh, he's just talking about the things we've always been talking about. How is that going to bring about final participation? That is not fair to Barfield's argument or his ideas. This leads to the point that De Fuchsia argues, that this is what makes Barfield different to Heidegger. Heidegger, as we saw, took from Eckhart this notion of relating to this, letting the rose be. And he takes up this notion from Eckhart, Gelesenheit. John Caputo talks a lot about this, the letting be. And he tends to emphasize a deep, so you can see what Heidegger's doing. He's trying to respond, but like Nietzsche, he's overcompensating Descartes' notion of the complete activity of mind. So Heidegger responds by a complete passivity, Gelesenheit, letting be, letting be. It's a deep passivity. It's so bloody Lutheran. And there's something deeply, right about that aspect of Eckhart. But Heidegger forgets the other important term in Eckhart, Durchbruch, breakthrough. You know what breakthrough is all about? It's about attentional scaling, breaking the inappropriate frame, moving through and making the new frame. Dirkbrook is just as important as Gelesen. And this is something Barfield picks up on. That, right, his notion of creativity as participatory is not to be just passively receptive. Oh, of course, it's not what Heidegger criticizes either, the Cartesian technological imposition of our will on the world. That's not what's meant by poiesis either. Poiesis is synergistic. God, because I think Barfield is ultimately non-theistic in some very important ways, God plays the leading role, but we contribute. And this was the original Hebrew insight of Da'ath. We're not just passive recipients of history, nor are we its complete authors. We participate history. We participate in history, and we are synergistically working with God in its making. Is Barfield a non-theist? I don't know. I can't make that argument as clearly as I can make it for Heidegger, for Jung, for Corbin, for Tillich. I suspect, though, if Barfield were to talk to these other prophets of the meaning crisis, he would also be led into a kind of non-theism. That is clearly the case for people like Schlegel, who so deeply influenced him. What have I tried to show you? I've tried to show you that the language, the vocabulary, the grammar, the framework of relevance realization, and how it can be developed to talk about spirituality and sacredness, can be put into deep dialogue with Heidegger, deep dialogue with Corbin, deep dialogue with Jung, deep dialogue with Tillich, deep dialogue with Barfield, and also afford deep dialogue, critical but creative dialogue between them, and afford a potential synoptic integration. All of this is what I've meant by, and what I mean by, awakening from the meaning crisis. Thank you so very much for this long journey we have traveled together. I've often taxed your attention, your patience, your understanding, your good spirits. I thank you for the ongoing support and appreciation and encouragement many of you have given me. And I look forward to an ongoing dialogue in the next series that I will create. Thank you very much. And I want to thank deeply the crew, constant here, my brothers in this project who continually afforded it and made it possible to be presented to you at this exemplary level of excellent quality. Thank you very much, one and all.
Oh, last time we're going to do that, huh? Sad.
Yeah, that's it. That's it. Forever.
So Barfield.
We can still meow.
Yeah. So Barfield, being influenced by Gnostics, Neoplatonists, and early Romantics. The term infinity of reality, as in the non-finity of reality.
The boundlessness.
Yeah. And this quote, the finite longing for moreness.
I like that, man. That inexhaustible moreness, that which consistently draws us towards self-transcendence, towards it, towards further and further relation with it.
And we have
So Barfield was part of the fellowship. Owen Barfield was hanging out with J.R.R. Tolkien, C.S. Lewis, Charles Williams, and wow, okay. So So Barfield indeed emphasizes the infinity of reality, the unboundedness, the inexhaustible moreness, and that finite longing, our finite longing for the infinite,
And we have
draws us into relationship.
in
So-
deepened meaning of sacredness now, the flow of transcendence in creativity.
And eduction, to draw out
Yeah, and
that which discloses the inexhaustible, that draws us out.
and that is poesis. You know, what we'd call poetry.
The self-makingness, the standing beyond,
Yeah,
are always finite longing for a relationship, a transframing, inexhaustible moreness, a transframing relationship with an inexhaustible moreness of reality. I can't even keep up with some of the sentences that Vervaeke spit today.
so we have Barfield's idea of ecstasis and creativity. It's the felt change in selfness as you go through a frame shift, and
Yes.
in a way that is found in poetry and just everyday language. That
Yes.
connects us to sacredness.
It is found in poetry and lyricism. Somehow the chains of symbols, all these words spelled together, all these little individual sigils, letters that we link together in this process of spelling, it can reawaken us to that inexhaustible sacredness of reality.
So there's
And the way to stand beyond ourselves through poesis, to have that felt change in consciousness.
there's this term that we're using as an example, pneuma spiritus, so the wind and self-moving. There, you could see them as two separate things. You know, so the objective wind, the things of the world, and the self-moving as the subjective, the spirit.
Self-moving aspects of the psyche.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Vervaeke would argue that those are non-logical identities.
That we utilize in an imaginal way
Yeah,
rather than
you could
imaginary.
and you could look at them as non-connective, or you can
See that their dual meaning kind of
Yeah.
further discloses deeper meaning in each of them
yeah,
together. Reveals that self-moving auto-poetic nature.
Yeah, they're participating with each other.
So
you
that's
know,
what spirit
this-
means.
yeah,
It's
this-
the play of both ways of looking at it.
Yeah, and you know, instead of it's just, you know, well, there's wind, or there's the world, and then there's the spirit. It's, well, the spirit interacting with the world, and the world interacting with the spirit, much like the agent arena relationship. It's not just an agent and just an arena, and they're these separate things. They're self-affording, self-informing
Yeah.
things. So,
Yeah,
you know,
at once.
and that's two ways of looking at, say, the language we're using in definitions. And he went into like the word attack, like how we use that. Well, it could be, you know, destruction and violence, or it could be critical argumentation, or say, like, you were out for this, but like the word see, that could be the visual experience, or it could be understand. Understand could also be unterstand, or
Stand under.
you said there's stand under and the conceptual understanding. And I think unterstand would be the conceptual understanding of it, to put it on a stand and look at it and grasp it that way, opposed to standing under. So when we use words, there's way more meaning
Always.
in every word
Yeah.
than would seem on the surface. And then again, there are two ways that you can look at this. Is it strictly just something that's pervasive in our culture, and the way we see the words is just because, you know, culturally they're accustomed to seeing them in certain ways, and if you have them in certain ways in certain relationships with each other, you get the understanding of it? Or is there, you know, has it evolved from something? So if it's just sensory experience, and then moving up into our going from a concrete thing into an abstract thing, right? And the third way of looking at this is not going from a concrete thing, a real thing, into an abstract intellectual thing, but both of them meeting in the imaginal space. So it's not just, dialectic where you have,
So you put them in a
concrete and
potent
abstract. It's
processing.
not it, and yeah, it's and
It's the yin and the yang. Once
yeah,
again, you know?
and so John Vervaeke then talked about re-accept, re-acceptation, exacting again.
Yeah, because he stresses there also needs to be a top-down way of understanding folded in here
Yeah,
as well.
yeah,
So we
top
get
down
them
and
both
bottom
in
up.
and bottom up, so we
Yeah,
can get them both working in relation. And the re-acceptation, we can invoke balance through just the idea of balance, but then we can use that to further express the idea of justice. The image of Lady Justice, for instance, holding the scales, so balance. But we can make a mistake and we can forget justice and just focus on balance sometimes too.
yeah,
You know,
yeah. So yet again, it's not an either or thing. It's a
yeah,
both
it's a
and.
both
And
and,
beyond, both, and then after the and is beyond. So both and beyond.
and that's why we keep getting stuck in these divisive
Sure.
situations in our cultures. Is
Yeah.
because we're doing that. We're thinking it's either or, and we fight over which, rather than realizing that it's likely both and. There's oftentimes a bit of truth in both.
And so Barfield was, developed an evolutionary schema of looking at this, which is original.
Merging, right?
What is it? Ah, original participation and then division.
And division. Yeah.
And the division being the meaning crisis, the breakdown. And so the original participation is this two worlds.
Recognizing the metaphor
Yeah.
that the multiple and often dualistic
And
meanings within
trying
words
to integrate this
tell us.
within the sciences.
Yeah. Yeah. But how
So
does it fit into
yeah,
a scientific, rational?
well, how do you make a science of meaning cultivation? Which I assume this is what John Vervaeke
And so, how
is
do you
trying
do
to
that? And so that's
So
exactly why Vervaeke's picking up where those before him
so
left
what he's
off.
doing is re-exaptation. That's what that is. This
Yes.
recycling, this the poesis.
Yeah, because if we can do this, then we can help remarry scientific inquiry with spiritual inquiry. So it's
So,
kind of a big deal.
so there's a
Across.
criticism of Barfield's followers. We should note in this one, Barfield cannot really be integrated into traditional theism. That's not to understand and get into what he was talking about. You can't look at it from the lens of theism and be like, oh yeah, this is verifying what I've always thought.
Yeah,
Because it's not. He's not. He's
'Cause-
not. He's not
because
delving
the
into
reality
that world.
of God.
He's looking beyond the
Yes.
theist atheist end of it. But
Yeah, because and to understand a relationship with God, that may well always be beyond our conception. We'll always be getting closer and closer and closer to, but there is no one. There are many paths to the mountaintop. We are finding that there are many points of relation between the world's great spiritual traditions, insights that they all share, and that complement one another, and then the different approaches to the mountaintop also give us a wider, more, you could say, high resolution, more 3D perspective, or widening of total perspective on how we may approach the divine together. So we can find ways to. Okay, well, let's jump here into where Barfield speaks of sacredness, the poesis, and participatory relation with the inexhaustible in the flow of creativity. So, in a joyful play, you could say, with life, we can participate with that inexhaustible fount, always open to the moreness of it. Never truly certain that we have it completely nailed down, that we're done, and that we are now, complete. We're recognizing that there's infinite room to grow for us, that God has given us an infinite arena in which to play.
well, that the God as a icon is expressing that, or
Right, yeah,
that's what
yeah.
that icon means when we say God is that.
Yes. Yeah.
Constant, ongoing. And he brought up Heidegger, I believe it was Heidegger, the
Heidegger.
Galsen chick. I don't speak German, but let it be, this passive let
Oh,
it be
yes.
thing, and you
Yes.
can't just let it be because then you forget about the breaking through. The let it be is the passive, and it'll just let things be, and there's the breakthrough as well that you need to have. And poesis is the synergistic. Synergistic, and then the quote I have here is, "God plays the leading role, but we contribute."
Yeah. So it's
We
not just deep
participate in
passivity or deep involvement, one or the other. It is both
both. Yeah,
at once. Yeah.
letting it
So
be and being.
so you are joyfully playing. You're fully engaged with the dance of life, yet you are not attached to the outcome whatsoever. You are fully in the moment, just applying your total faculties to to this moment, and that's how we enact the flow state.
Well,
That's
it's
how
kind of like
the guy
imagine
makes the shot at the end of the game.
like you could
know?
imagine like a monk. Doesn't matter whether it's like Buddhist or Orthodox or whatever. Just a monk could you know deal with the sufferings of life, and it's like it is what it is. Let it be what it is. But then also actively making themselves better person, better to deal with the pains of life, better to prevent them, better. So at the same time of accepting what is, and just letting it be, there's that, and the doing it,
And they're doing it
and doing the being thing.
in an engaged,
Yeah.
but non-affected way. Like a fully engaged, but not bothered by a potential outcome, just fully engaged way of being.
Might be a good way of looking at, like, if you're studying history and looking at history, looking at it as if you are participating actively in history, because you are just tomorrow's history, right?
And we are in participation with the sacred.
Yeah, yeah. We're co-creators.
We are. We really are, though. And we see that in the fruit of our labors and our impact on each other, on the planet, in all the good and the bad ways. So creativity as participatory. Because, of course, creativity in participation is not passive.
Well, I guess you can't create by doing
But
nothing.
you can't create by being all, like, tied up and thinking about, oh, how well is this going to be received? You got to be free to fully just let the thing out. Like when you're playing a lead on guitar, during a song, when, it's the jazz musician having a profoundly appropriate and beautiful thing to say musically at just the right way at just the right moment, is what happens with the basketball player that shoots the half court shot with the last second on the clock and makes it without thinking, fully engaged with the moment. But not that there's not a bunch of processing power going into, oh, what could happen if I don't make this shot right now? Like, no, you're just fully there and you're in the flow state. It's like when we ourselves make that no look shot at the basket with the crumpled up piece of paper and it goes in. It's effortless effort.
Yeah,
Woo-wee,
and then
woo-wee.
there's the like you can't just be under the waterfall meditating all the time and grow.
Yeah. And
You
to,
know.
but and also to
Nor can you be out amongst the people all the time with no time for drawing in
Yeah.
either and grow, because like on one there's nowhere to grow. The other would be there's too much there and it just tramples down and you're not hardy enough to grow through it as well. So, it's like the scaling up and scaling down
Yeah.
at the same time. It's the most optimal place to be would be in dual the non-dual state between all of these opponent processes, for a lack of a better word.
Yeah, recognizing our expectations and reservations that occur in our minds all at once, and being disattached to them, just recognizing, oh yeah, there's that thought process going, there's that emotion rising up, but I'm fully committed
And
in
then
this
having the
moment.
wisdom to know
I'm all
when's the
in.
right time to act on one of those things that's popping up, because sometimes there's a reason why that anxiety is getting you,
Yeah,
because maybe
yeah, no,
somebody's
that
tailing you,
all
and
all
you
that
gotta.
growth, needs to be checked by our own sense of virtue. We need to be able to develop virtuosity in life, and the only way to do that is to be in a deep relation with a sense of the sacred. Because we want to do it in a wise way. We want to grow and develop forward in a mutually beneficial way with ourselves as stewards of this planet, with all of its living beings.
Living
So,
beings.
yes.
You are the being whose being is in question.
That's the
I
trick
gotta
to
make this being
self-inquiry right
character.
there is, yeah. Yeah, your very state of beingness is questioning its very self, its very sense of self. It's turning the arrow of awareness back in on itself. Okay, so we are aware beings. What better way to understand the great mystery of life, but with the direct experience we all have access to right now, this very moment? So that is meditation. That is just being here now, just as it is, noticing the thoughts that arise rather than following them, noticing that the mind will get stuck on following them sometimes without even noticing, and then you're all of a sudden lost in a train of thought, and you recognize, oh yeah, there I was thinking, and I'm not supposed to think, I'm meditating. It's not that you're not supposed to think,
I'm
it's
not
just
supposed to
that
chastise
you want
myself
to
about that
notice.
either.
You want to just notice
Mm.
when you are thinking, and then return softly back to the sense of awareness, so that you can learn to rest and abide as that awareness, from that awareness more in life, and you get more space around your thoughts, so you are not immediately impacted by emotions and ideas, thoughts
Oh, we've
that
got-
are as they arise. You have more room to respond and choose how you wish to respond to
well,
whatever.
there's a symbolic word for that. You know, when all that shit passes, and you see it and go,
Yeah, you notice the judgments even about
Yeah.
yourself,
Yeah.
catching
I
yourself.
don't know if it's a
thinking,
word. I
yeah.
don't know if HM dot question mark is a word, but
No,
you
yeah,
know that whole
look-
like you catch yourself, and you know before you have the thought of the thought, you have that experience and acceptance, and just
Yeah, and yeah. So look at that, with that voice within, that ongoing monologue, with a sense of wonder and fascination and that kind of curiosity. You know, there isn't. We're not doing this to have something, like to gain peace or enlightenment. We're doing it for the very sake of it, because it feels good and it can transform and grow us in a real way. We don't have to have an expectation of that for it to happen. We just participate in that process, in that state of wonder. And you know, you will find, most assuredly, as all of the great spiritual traditions tell us and point us towards, this ineffable sense of oneness that is intrinsic, that is like it's always been here. But it was so right under our noses. Right, you know, it's no wonder that we so easily miss it. We think that we are our thoughts rather than we have these thoughts. And who is the you that has the thoughts? Who are you without a word to define? Because you have definitions. You can describe your preferences. I can describe my preferences to you and put that forth as who I am. But there is a me that has all those preferences, and it is descriptionless. But it is still an experiential reality. I am being. We have words to point to it.
perhaps
now,
that's
here,
one of
I.
perhaps that's one of the meanings in the idea that we are made in God's image. If God is a no thing, and that true big S self is also not
yeah.
a thing,
Yes. That ultimate
is
nature
no
of what
thing.
we are is also that ground of being, that no thingness, that
I
inexhaustible
think it goes
fount.
deeper than that, because like any
Yeah.
word, there's
Of
many
course, it's
interpretations.
just pointing
But
to-
still, I think
yeah,
that's
yeah.
that's part of it.
It's pointing to something that we could go on
The
describing
root
forever.
core of us is no thing.
No thingness.
You know?
Yeah.
And the thing is you can recognize no thing.
Not nothingness.
Like when
But
you say
beyond
like,
thingness.
who are you? What are you? Well, you could
Yeah.
point to yourself. I could look at you and then have all the memories I have of you, which wouldn't be true, but
Yeah.
I could still see the core of something that is
Yeah, it's-
you, that can't be listed. You know, can't be a feature list, nor can it just be your structural functional organization either, or a combination of lived experiences and memories and all that stuff. It's the thing that is not the thing.
Yes.
No thing at the
It's
core.
all of that, and the thing that actually has all of that. Really,
Yeah.
that's what we really are. Yeah.
Yeah. Before
And that
you,
thing
what-
is inexhaustible. Yeah. You can go on trying to describe that forever, but
you
no
before-
one word can define it. It's beyond all. It's beyond any one thing and all things at once. It is the source of thingness.
Well, and if you believe in the Big Bang too, before it was the singularity that exploded, what was the no thing before that thing? So, yeah. Yeah, I hope we really disprove the Big Bang, because my brain doesn't like that one either. Or not disproves it, but maybe shows that it's more of a blossoming off of something
Or
else,
breathing,
or
kind of,
you know,
yeah,
or
kinda almost kind of
something. But
process,
the idea of
an opening and a closing and an opening and a closing. But
Unless,
whenever it closes here, it's opening somewhere else. It's
unless
in
the physical universe truly is completely infinite and always infinite and beyond infinite to,
well, if it begin at some point, it began in something that always has been.
non-finite,
Yeah,
non-finite.
it begins in something that was non-finite, that has always been, that was omnipresent.
But then here's our language.
And so
again.
how do we explain
Begins,
whatever omnipresence a
Yeah.
Big Bang could occur in? Yeah.
Yeah, it's just weird.
There is some kind of inexhaustible fount. And we can experience through the very ground of being. And it just so happens to be that ground of being is synonymous with what we're all using in all our variant cultures, the word God to point to. So here we are. We find ourselves in this time where we're all now plugged in and communicating, and all our cultures are informing one another, and we're learning from each other and learning to relate with each other more deeply and more honestly and just more ably, because we haven't had the terminology to do so very well, at least when it comes to the deepest subject matter of all, when you're talking about ontology and spiritual ideas, philosophy.
Well, I think that's why it's important for, as best you can, to get yourself into this long conversation that's as long as man. So even if you don't have the exact words for it or language for it, somebody else might have a round enough understanding of it where you can communicate well enough to keep going.
To fellowship together on it.
Yeah,
And that seems to be the right orientation.
True philosophy, true, loving of this process of wisdom, and
because then we can encourage each other.
Yes,
along the way. Help each other through the tough spots. And,
put in courage.
And then we come up with these symbols of these perfect, ultimate, beautiful examples of like Jesus Christ and Buddha and Krishna.
And almost you could see like
to give us examples of how to be, these ultimate embodiments of highest levels of most loving and peaceful ways of being, and we can use those as symbols to relate through to that so that the existential self can be in that poesis, that poetic process of creation, of self-creation, to come into that essential self. And for that essential self to ever grow. That's the beauty of it, is that once you have your first, say, religious or greatly transformative, transcendent experience, or even if it's just like a soft, slow awakening into just kind of like a nice homeostasis, just everything just kind of flows, and I feel a greater sense of oneness with things around. It can happen in multiple ways. It can happen in great bursts, but that great burst or that long, slow, beautiful marinating into that realization, they both are not the end. It's just the beginning. It's just the beginning. There is no cap to enlightenment.
No cap, and that is no cap.
That is no cap. And we can always grow together, and we get this infinite room to grow. So how exciting. And we also have the ultimate stakes right now. What an exciting story we find ourselves in. It's like we're in the climax of something. If we make it past this, if we make it through this bottleneck, this eye of the needle, what beautiful future do those that come after us get to inhabit?
Well, we are evolving biological creatures. So we do need a fair deal of stress and risk and danger and adversity to overcome, to give us the initiative to overcome.
It's grist for the mill.
If you believe in evolution, which I do, evolution comes from responses to things, whether it's the need to breed, eat, survive in a condition, whether it's hot, cold, water, air, dry, you name it, and what worked and what didn't. And what drove that is external and internal conditions that weren't normal and cool and just normal.
Right.
There always had to be some stressor pushing us to do it. In the case of mating rituals and physical accompaniments for mating, whether it's signaling or battling each other like horns and stuff like that, or social things, like meerkats, how they all watch out for each other, or prairie dogs who've developed a language in a weird way, or humans we've developed all these little traditions and rituals we do with each other to get along, to signal things that are just encoded in us now because of all the stress of dealing with other humans, and the dangers of dealing with other humans. And now that we're not really subjected to lions and tigers and bears, or even Mother Nature and weather as a dominant evolutionary factor, we are finding out something else. We're going in and we're becoming our own worst enemy, if you will. And I think it would be important for us to, as
So we're
personally,
grasping for meaning. Yeah.
but personally and as a species, to intentionally go into this and challenge ourselves, opposed to fighting and killing each other and worrying about somebody disrespecting me or something that happened on the other side of the planet that I know nothing of, but I'm going to get worked up about it because I have this deep desire to grow and overcome that's not being satiated by the natural environment around me.
So I'm belonging where I can.
We're an adventuring species too, and that's where the space, getting out into space, that's the next frontier for us, because we've gone all around the planet. There's only a few places on the planet we haven't touched.
Yeah, and if we don't want to agree on space, we can agree on just learning to live synergistically, symbiotically with this planet and with one another. We can improve at that game too.
Well,
We can be
the world of the mind, and soon the digital space that we're going to be interacting with, and
And there's always the infinite and imaginal landscapes that we can operate through, and the worlds that we can create in story and art. There's infinite directions to go, and there's infinite room to grow.
Yeah,
I think that's the name of the game, because God knows, like, I know it seems hopeless out there right now, and that there's really no hope for the future in some sense to a lot of people, or that at least there's a lot of bad coming up in the future, and it's certain. Yeah, probably. But, if there's the slightest chance that, 0.001% chance of making it through this bottleneck and there not being serious civilizational collapse or wide-scale wars or, depravity and destruction.
if we don't wipe ourselves back to
blah,
the
blah,
Stone
blah.
Age, that'd be nice.
If there's even a sliver of hope, then let's fucking go for it. And even if there truly were no hope, doesn't it feel right? Isn't it the right thing to do, to go for it anyway? To do the best we possibly can?
I mean, what's the worst that could happen? You fail?
To be the world that we wish to see?
Well, you're
to become that?
You're going to fail either way. You fail if you don't, and maybe you will succeed if you do. But failure is still an option, but success is only an option if you do.
Right.
Doesn't exist in the not doing. See the
Hope should be seen as something that we enact, not just merely something you believe in, but something that we help create.
hope as an aspiration.
Yes, hope is aspiration. That's exactly the.
Opposed to hope is just a passive thing. I've got a phrase: hope in one hand, shit in the other.
Yeah.
Which is basically, you could say you hope and do nothing, and that doesn't matter. But hey, at least shit grows flowers, and that's doing something, right?
Right. And, there's people tracking the ongoing meta crisis, the myriad existential crises facing our species right now. Be the amounts of PCBs in everybody's bloodstreams these days, and microplastics, and degradation of oceans, and, potential for nuclear holocausts and chemical warfare and germ warfare, getting to scary places. There's AI, potentially ending civilization as we know it.
There's always the big
solar
rock,
flares,
the big rock we didn't see.
Yeah, the big rock.
The magnetic pole shifts, and our magnetosphere is getting weaker and weaker and weaker, and has been doing it for hundreds of years. So
all of these variant crises that are happening at once actually many of them exacerbate one another. And so that's the meta crisis.
Yeah.
And so it's like we're at this juncture in history where our species must learn to adapt in a higher way with each other, with its fellows, and with the environment, with this planet. We must be symbiotic. We must be the stewards that we have the great capacity to be.
We must develop wisdom,
or we fail, at this round at least, and we make it near impossible for anything that comes after us to be able to become interplanetary.
Well,
we've exhausted all the accessible resources for doing so.
In all honesty,
maybe hundreds of millions of years from now.
In all honesty, if it wasn't for how slow evolution is, I think if humans were to disappear now, in 1,000 years, the planet would be right back to where it was, minus a few things, and with a few more like scars in it. But
minus any easily accessible fossil fuels, for
but
instance, to
my
jumpstart a
my biggest
civilization.
concern is we might be the only chance this planet has to develop a species that can get off of it and go out into
think
the
that's
universe
pretty likely at
because
this point.
time
Yeah.
is a thing.
And we do have the potential, through nuclear holocaust, to really irradiate the planet for
And we're
quite a long
we're like
time.
right in the middle of the prime period in Earth's fertility window, if you will. Too early, there's too much oxygen, the planet was too volatile, it was still hot, it was figuring out life, and then you get to a point where it's like, okay, conditions are just right, we can develop the kind of brains we need, we can develop upright posture that allows us to use our hands, the creatures that are going to eat us aren't too big, there's enough resources that have been churned up from the bottom of the planet up to the top that we can use for things
At the right time. Yeah,
but then there's going to be a period of time that window is going to leave, and then we're going to be more like Mars as the planet's going on in its golden years.
right.
And I think there's a high possibility that we are the only
good point.
species the planet has ever created that's going to get
That
out.
have gotten to this point.
Because if
and
the
that
planet's a
could get
living
out, yeah,
organism,
yeah.
it wants to spread its life out. Life wants to spread out to other things and create more life.
Universe does seem to life. It's very rare, but that seems to be the highest, most complex,
The fact that it happens,
special thing it can do. That seems to be its highest purpose.
So that's
Universe
my
is
whole thing.
cosmos
Is
life.
I'm not an anti-human person that's like, we're messing up the planet, we're parasites. I'm like, no, we are the last chance this planet has to get off of itself.
We are the only ones that can stop the next asteroid from killing all of the fluffy bunny rabbits and puppies and kittens.
Yeah.
So
You like them capybaras?
save the humans.
Yeah. Save the humans from themselves, and we'll help save the creatures and stop killing them unnecessarily.
You seen that killer whale meme? It's like literally a killer whale with like
The
a picket
that says
sign
save
in
the
its
humans.
fin that says "Save the humans." Yeah.
That's great. Well, orcas seem to
We got to save ourselves.
they seem to actually like helping us when they're not in captivity.
Yeah.
When they don't go crazy from being kept in a prison cell and made to do tricks. Yeah, I ain't down with SeaWorld doing that. I'm sorry.
yeah,
I'm
no.
not I'll eat animals.
What was that
If somebody
documentary,
offers me killer
Blackfish?
whale, I'll eat it.
Yeah.
But I'm not down with in most kinds of zoos. I really can't do. Now the zoos where it's like this lion would never survive out in the wild because they got horribly maimed or something like that, or we rescued him from a breeder or something like that. I can see that because rehabilitation is a thing. But yeah, I love the animals, but I love humans more. Just saying. And I have a huge respect for what this planet's trying to do. And I want to help. But we're also...
It'd be a cool way for zoos to be just rehabilitation centers where the public,
Yeah, there's actually a lot of places that
can
are
still
like
bring
that.
the kids to go and
Yeah.
see the wonder of all these animals.
Yeah, there's people like I follow online that,
But the animals are
help
constantly
foxes
changing and
other
going
stuff.
and coming and going. Yeah.
Or some of them stay around because they'll never be able to
A lot
survive
of zoos
again,
are doing that too. But yeah. Just a zoo as a business, and you're keeping them there for a lifetime.
Yeah.
You don't need to. That sucks.
But, so humans can do better, and we should aspire to do better instead of just complaining and being like, wow, it's never going to happen. It's like, well, with that attitude...
No, we just got to quit expecting everyone else or somebody else to do it, and just blaming the outside world for the way it is and forgetting that we are an integral part of the process. Every single one of us makes up society together, and we can, by changing ourselves, change the world from the inside out.
And we're going to have to become okay with being less comfortable. And I don't mean that just physically. If something bad happens, then yes, we're going to have to deal with it physically. But being less comfortable within our own minds and how we think and how we look at things. Because it's just, well, I want to be comfortable, so I don't want to think about things. It's like, well, sometimes you have to tackle those uncomfortable problems.
This is why we need our wisdom traditions, our spiritual traditions, because we do need to self-inquire and also relate with the world in a deeply participatory way to help unfold from within ourselves and in the world around us that which we wish to see. And so we're recognizing at all times that we are in touch with something that is sacred in every way and every moment. And if we treat life as such, then we're going to be most fully engaged in optimal fashion. We're going to create better past memories and the futures that we wish to see just by living here in this moment most responsibly. I think that's kind of the trick of it for us is, it's an autopoietic dance that we are gifted, graced with the opportunity to be a part of.
Yep. And we're at the perfect time to be too, man. It seems like we're right in the middle
Dude, what an exciting
between
part of the story,
what
right?
we've been building up to and what we're going to become. We're like right in that
Yes.
middle spot,
Yes.
which is traumatic as hell and quite uncomfortable, but it's definitely worth the doing. It's better than
I
not
think
doing
so,
it.
man. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And
And this is how, if we do become an interplanetary species, it's almost kind of like the way that we earn the right to be able to go out there and explore. It seems like it's makes sense that it's very hard for a species to get off a planet without killing itself, because once you
Yeah.
become capable of the technological capacity to be interplanetary, you are messing with technologies that are
Yeah.
planetarily destructive.
that's where I think like
Planetarily, I guess you could
the
say
chance
that.
of aliens being outright hostile is probably not too high. Now, mind you, not wanting to be messed with and just kind of being ambivalent towards other sentient species, I could see that, but I think curiosity is a life thing too. Every animal on the planet has some form of curiosity, even the dopey, stupid inbred goldfish. You know, plants almost seem curious. Like if you ever watch a vine sped up and looking around, it's feeling around, and then it gets something, and
Yeah.
it goes. So, but that the chance of a super advanced species that would had the ability to get off of its planet within a certain time frame within the universe, that requires a lot of cooperation and quite a deal of wisdom, no matter how alien and strange it would be, to do that. And then just being out in space and traveling around space, yeah, you could de-evolve into a more predator species, but I don't necessarily see
I think
that.
it's probably rare. Hopefully it's rare. Hopefully it's some kind of like, very
Well, it could be
maybe
like,
happenstance, but useful and beneficial bottleneck that's built into the universe, that it's just hard to get off your own planet without destroying yourself. If you have achieved a high level of symbiosis with your planet to grow and advance long enough and far enough without exhausting its resources and killing yourselves off through some kind of nuclear holocaust or what have you.
or even
Yeah.
just the chance of getting smacked by a big old rock.
And by that point, yeah, you're pretty wise. You know how to get along with yourself and other species and in a symbiotic way. And then you're responsible enough and wise enough then at that point to probably engage with other species in a productive manner.
Or it could just actually be the dark force thing, and it's just life is very violent and horrible and awful, and everybody's staying quiet because they don't want to get
It's
gobbled
probably a
up
bit
by
of
the
both,
super
man.
predator,
You know,
whatever.
those Independence Day kind of parasitic aliens that hop from planet to planet or sun to sun, sucking it dry. Like they could very well exist as
which
well.
got
It's
taken
a
down
big
by
universe.
like 1990s level cyber technology. Okay.
Yeah, but I do like that that it is very difficult, obviously, for a species to live long enough and get to a high enough technological level to get off its planet without destroying itself. That's hard. So
I also-
that probably does weed out a lot of the
I do have an idea that
selfish and the dangerous and the predatory.
space travel will be less physical, like mechanical, and more. I don't want to say interdimensional, like, oh, you're traveling to another dimension, but no, traveling through another dimension to different places, whether it's through the mind or supercomputive, what would you call it, bridging devices that bridge the mechanical that you can interact with the wind, and then the spirit, the energy of the universe, and then travel along another way, because it is very, 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 very difficult to mechanically travel through space in any type of time frame that isn't you're turning into a completely different culture, much less species, as you travel to
If we can
another
figure out
viable
how
planet.
to full time in space and pop out somewhere
I think
else.
it's probably has more
or,
to do with
or
in
we
here
learn
than
how
it
to
does
do it through intravenous DMT.
Well,
trips or
the way
God knows,
the way you think, the way you interact with the world, like who's to say that our brains aren't a super sophisticated device that life and DNA has created in order to, well, first physically travel through the worlds, and then, well, the other than physical way to travel through the worlds. Because really our brain is just a machine that was made by the force of life trying to life and trying to animate itself and move around and interact and come to a better grasp of the universe to then interact with the universe more and replicate itself. So we're making some pretty wonderful, cool machines that are, bending time and space. Well, we can already bend time, you just speed it up. We have like the International Space Station is going so fast that their time frame is ever so slightly different than ours here on the ground.
Oh, interesting.
Same thing with the Voyager probe. That thing is going freaking fast, like scary fast. That thing's time frame is different, and that's just mechanical movement, right?
Yeah.
We got the the colliders and all that stuff that bend it. You know, who knows what certain radio frequency combinations can do to things? They can sure make you sick, but they can transfer massive amounts of information, long distances, almost in real time. So like we're on the edge technologically and I think spiritually to either a great breakthrough or utter destruction, technologically and spiritually.
Can we cultivate wisdom fast enough now as a species with the great help of the internet that we have access to and other medium? Can we popularize, encourage one another to ever higher levels of self-realization and participatory relation with this sacred reality that we find ourselves in? Can we calm our divisions through the recognition of our shared ground of being? Can we change this world from the inside out?
And the outside in.
That's the question, and we get to answer. We get to answer that question, and we have the power to. Like, how many minds can we put together on an idea at once now? How fast did everybody agree with the meme Epstein didn't kill himself?
Well, now
when that meme came out,
now there's the new Boeing
within
executive.
48, 72 hours, was it 3-4 billion people that were like, "Yep, that's correct."
Well, now there's the Boeing guy. Not an executive, but like whatever quality manager.
You can move ideas fast.
Do you hear about this?
Yeah.
Well, and people, and it has become a thing where it's, well, he didn't Epstein himself. So now Epstein has become a symbol for a whole other understanding.
Yes.
And the more you understand the symbol, the deeper you can go into what actually happened.
Yes.
Yes. Because it's like Epstein himself, so he didn't kill himself, but it's like, what we're actually talking about is there's probably a group of people that wanted him shut up. That had a lot of sway and power and yada, 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 go down the rabbit hole, keep going down it, so you can go real deep with that symbol.
You can say a lot with that,
Since humans we're funny like that.
That's what memes are.
Hey, well, memes are mimetic devices, dude. They're they create and hold on to memory.
They carry an idea, and then everyone understands the background of what that implies, and so it can load a lot of meaning into something very simple that you can share widely, very quickly and easily.
Another one.
And be immediately understood.
Yeah. Before it was Epstein, it was Clinton, if you remember.
Oh, right. Yeah.
It used to be, you got Clinton.
Yeah.
Right. Suicide, shot himself twice in the back of the head, stuff like that. I know it's really dark, but like memes can be dark and and not just visual memes, but also joke memes and stuff like that. And it's our way of dealing with dark, horrific things that, whether true or not, or whether imaginary or imaginal, are still a thing.
Yeah, because it's like comedy doesn't just take the edge out of something that's dark. It also helps us understand it and find a positive way to deal with it.
Yeah.
And to convey important information. Because there's something that we're still working on here together. Obviously, if we're making this joke and it's relevant. It's funny at the same time, which takes the edge out of it, thankfully. So comedy is an incredible adaptation. How did we evolve comedy? I love that we have that capacity as humans to be able to broach very difficult subjects sometimes and surprise people and even change their minds in a way that they find enjoyable, like they appreciate it. Like, that's right, that's true. I gotcha.
Yep.
Oh boy, I like it. We got built-in superpowers, fam.
That was a good series.
Yeah, man.
Can't believe it's done, man.
I can't believe it is either. And it's really, the real game's now just begun.
Yeah, we're gonna have to.
Now it's about enacting and embodying, and further understanding. Because there's a whole book list here. I've gone into few of the books that I have that Vervaeke has gone into, but he lists like a few books per episode.
Yeah,
there's a huge reading list here to go into for further texture. But of course, there is just the enacting of the wisdom. There is the engagement and the increase in commitment to that engagement with the ground of being, with that inexhaustible fount, that source from which we all spring. And really taking that game seriously, you know. I think that's it.
Yeah.
That's what we're doing here at Actual I. We are realizing our truest, most authentic expressions of self in service to our co-creative engagement with the wider world.
This is Actual I, and I guess the show, are we calling it Meaning Making 101? Is that going to be our
I think,
shtick?
yeah, we'll continue doing that whenever we're doing this thing here and we're going into this stuff together, and, you know, we'll be enacting fellowship, and we'll be making
about,
meaning together.
And, you know, the things that, you know, happen socially, spiritually, politically, all that, you know, and applying this kind of lens to it, because, like, yeah, we can complain and postulate and speculate all we want, but
yeah, we can take
like,
sides and say we're right and they're wrong.
I'd rather just try to understand why it's happening, how it's happening, the structural functional organization of it, not just the feature list.
And because we need to know what the lay of the land so that we can start building bridges. If we're really trying to take this thing seriously and be responsible stewards. You know, we're trying to be adults in this world today as it is in this modern age, and this is the game, and it's the most exciting high level game our species has ever engaged in, as far as we can tell. Like, we've never made it to this point, and stakes are high, but it's also most deeply meaningful.
Well, we got really good at playing with rocks at some point in time in our history, but can't remember how we used to do that.
It's always been the same old game between life and death, but I love that we, even at some point, begin to realize, and in our native cultures we see that people really cared about making sure that they were taking care of the world around them well enough for the next 14 generations, just really thinking ahead about how they engaged with the world, how they grew up together, how they taught their children and one another.
Well, even in the most like
treated the world,
in the most selfish way of doing it, like, you know, like direct family lineage and wanting that like dynasty, if you will, still puts your mind into the future,
more long-term thinking,
opposed to just the immediate now.
Because there is a continual line that comes after us.
Yeah, and you know, even, you know, people in the past that were, you know, trying to keep their bloodline and do all that stuff, and we look at that as horrible or whatever, they were still trying to do what, say, like the Native Americans thinking seventh generation, you know, the 7 generations ahead, what would it be like then? It's still the same thing.
Yes.
It just doing, you know, we need to, you know, be careful about how we go about doing these things. You know.
Yes, because we generate and impact this culture that we partake in.
Yeah.
We're not merely receivers and vessels.
Yeah.
We are also enactors and creators. So we are part of the process.
You're not just the pebble. You're not just the pond. You are, once you throw the pebble, it interacts with the pond. It becomes part of the pond. It is the pond.
And the pebble in relation.
And the pebble. And the ripples. And the duckweed on top of it.
And the source of all pebbles and ripples.
And the frog that just swam off that actually saved his butt from a fish that was going to eat him. And now that frog is going to spawn children. And
the sound of the ribbit. You are the feel of the air. Yeah. You are the movement of the wind in the trees. The clouds in the sky.
You are the wind that has been passed. Passing wind.
Inexorable parts.
Fart jokes.
All the wind that has passed and the wind that has been passed. And the wind that ever will be passed.
Now, you can pass wind, as in farting, but can you, like, pass wind?
Can you pass?
Like,
I think if you're going fast enough, if it's a slow breeze, you know, you can pass
it. But then you have wind coming in the other direction.
But have you ever passed some wind while passing wind? That's the question.
Or past your wind, past wind. Farting faster than the wind.
Well, you know, sometimes people pass wind downwind purposefully in order to catch someone that's coming upwind behind them. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And on that note, that's how we're going to end the 50-part series, is on fart jokes.
We've made it back down to our essential humanness, I feel like.
Yeah. Well, you know.
If we can't laugh at ourselves, what do we got, man? Love you guys. This has been an amazing series. Thank you, all of you that have joined us, even for little bits and pieces of this, because it has been a shared inquiry, and we invite you to continue wondering along with us and realizing our highest visions together as we encourage ourselves to change and one another to change this world from the inside out. I've been Chris.
I've been DJ.
This is Actual I Podcast. You've been listening to our special series, Meaning Making 101. If you guys enjoy the show, make sure that you like and subscribe. And let's give some love to John Vervaeke. Like and subscribe to his channel as well. If you like listening to podcasts, Actual Eye is on all major podcast networks, Spotify, Apple, Google, and all the rest. And of course, on social media, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter or X as well. We're always live streaming every Wednesday around 7 p.m. EST on Facebook, Twitch, and of course here on YouTube. Thank you guys so much for tuning in, and feel free to share your likes and comments and join in on the conversation. Love y'all. Talk to you soon.